Welcome to HP Fanfiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these.
It was now September 1st, and the teenage occupants of Grimmauld Place had just made it to the Hogwarts Express in their usually late fashion. Fred and George quickly left to find their friend Lee Jordan, leaving the other three to make their way onto the train. They boarded the express and managed to find a near-empty compartment in the very last carriage. The only two people inside were Neville Longbottom and a girl who was in Guinea's year, Luna Lovegood. Neville looked relieved when the other teens entered the compartment and seemed to visibly relax considerably. He had lost a lot of weight over the summer, and he no longer had the chubby, boyish face. He looked more like the growing teen he was, and not an oversized child. "I have to go to the prefect's carriage for a meeting," Hermione said quietly. "Congratulations, Hermione," Neville praised. "It was a no-brainer that you would get it," he finished genuinely. "Thank you, Neville," she replied, gratefully, as she left. Ron simply looked irritated. He thought that with Harry being missing, then he stood a chance at being made prefect also, but that had not happened. "Who got the male position in Gryffindor?" he asked sullenly, noticing Neville wasn't wearing the badge. "Dean Thomas got it. I saw him on the platform," Neville replied. "Dean?" Ron questioned critically. "But he's an idiot," he grumbled, scowling. "He gets the best grades in our dorm, and he stays out of trouble." Neville shrugged. "Makes sense to me with Harry not coming back." "How do you know he's not coming back?" Ron asked suspiciously. "He wrote to me after I sent him a birthday present," Neville answered, "but he told me not to talk about it to anyone except you guys. He said you knew he was okay," he finished. "We haven't heard from him at all," Ron moaned moodily. "Why would he write to you?" "Did you write to him?" Neville questioned in reply. "Well, no, I thought he would write when he could," Ron muttered, his ears turning red in annoyance and embarrassment. "So you just sent him an owl and he got it?" Ginny interjected. "That's right," Neville confirmed. "How else would you write to someone?" he asked rhetorically. "He's going to be so furious with us," Ginny said quietly. "Definitely," Neville replied simply. "He can't be mad at us," Ron pointed out. "And even if he is, he will get over it," he concluded confidently. Before Neville could reply, Ginny intervened, seeing the peeved demeanor the other boy was now sporting. "What did he say in his letter?" she inquired. "He just said he's okay, and has a lot to do to keep everything between us, and he will see us all soon enough," Neville answered ominously. With that, the door opened, and in came an irritated-looking Hermione. Upon sensing the atmosphere in the compartment, she looked at each person, waiting for an explanation. "Harry wrote to Neville," Ron said sulkily. Hermione was taken aback. Of all the trivial things she was expecting, this wasn't it. She had so many questions running through her mind that they all came spewing out in one long sentence. "How is he? Is he okay? When is he coming back? What did he say to you? Why would he write to you and not us?" She finished breathlessly, sounding upset. "He is okay, but we have to keep it to ourselves," Neville responded, gesturing to those present. His eyes went wide in terror as they fell onto Luna, who he had forgotten was still there. "Luna, you can't say anything to anyone," he said pleadingly. The other girl seemed to snap out of some form of trance and seemed surprised by how many people were in the compartment with her. "I'm sorry, were you all talking about something?" she questioned. "I was thinking about my summer. Me and my father went to Sweden looking for many wonderful creatures," she finished, clearly ignorant of any conversation that had taken place. Neville breathed a sigh of relief and simply mouthed the word later to Hermione, who had now taken her seat. "Who are the other prefects?" Ron asked. "Take a guess," Hermione answered sourly. Ron groaned, knowing that that sour tone could only mean one thing. Before he could answer, the compartment door opened, and in stepped a gleeful-looking Malfoy flanked by his two usual goons and Pansy Parkinson. "Ah, Weasel," he intoned elaborately. "See this?" he asked, pointing to the silver badge that was pinned to his robes. "This proves what I have always known, that I am better than you." He finished laughing at the reaction he was getting from the redhead. Ron was furious, but before he could react, he felt his sister grab the back of his robes and pull him tightly into the seat, restraining him. "Piss off, Malfoy," he replied through gritted. Weasel, you should respect your betters," Malfoy replied, waggling his finger in Ron's face. "There's no more Scarhead to protect you," he said smugly. "Rumor has it his corpse is nothing more than a trophy over a very special fireplace," he finished. The other occupants in the carriage were furious, but Malfoy and his goons left quickly before any retribution could be had. I'm gonna kill him, Ron shouted furiously. Forget it, Ron, Hermione advised. You know Malfoy is only talking. He will get a big surprise when he finds out that Harry is okay. She huffed, attempting to calm the boy. The rest of the journey passed by with them all lost in their own thoughts, and before they knew it, they were sat in the Great Hall waiting for the feast to begin. Dumbledore rose from his seat at the center of the staff table, his eyes twinkling in their usual way. The whole fell silent as he raised his arms to garner the attention of the students and staff. Welcome both new and returning students, he began. Before we get to the announcements of the year, I believe it is both prudent and customary to first dine on the fine food offered here at Hogwarts. He finished waving a hand across the breadth of the hall, causing the empty plates and dishes to fill with an assortment of food. Who is that? Neville asked, indicating to the only new member of staff at the table, a short, stout woman wearing a pink cardigan and a matching bow in her hair. Ron swallowed the mouthful of food he had before he looked towards the woman. New defense professor, he shrugged before continuing his onslaught. She doesn't look up to much, does she? Neville said before adding food to his own plate. The rest of the meal passed in companionable silence, and the students waited patiently for Dumbledore to conclude the feast so they could make their way to their respective dormitories. Eventually he rose, and the room fell silent once again. Again, welcome to you all, he began. Firstly, the Forbidden Forest is just that. Forbidden to all students, old and new, he said, aiming a glance at the Weasley twins, who were looking every bit the picture of innocence. Mr. Filch has asked me to remind you that a list of all banned items can be found attached to his office door. For those that may need reminding, he explained, again looking at the twins. And finally, we have only one staff change this year. Please join me in welcoming Madame Umbridge, who will be taking over as your defense against the dark arts lessons for this year, he said, starting a round of applause that was half-heartedly given by the students. Before he could continue, said woman stood from her seat and made her way to the podium, gesturing for Dumbledore to sit down. Him. She coughed in a very irritating way. My name is Dolores Jane Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister. What followed was a long drawn-out speech that very few paid attention to and were only roused by the clapping of the headmaster. One final thing, the woman chimed in before the headmaster could assume control. I would like Mr. Potter to join me in my office at the conclusion of the feast. She requested in a simpering, girlish tone, scanning the room for the teen. The room began to speak in hushed whispers, wondering what was going on. It was Neville who stood to address the woman as he saw the members of the staff was reluctant to. Harry has been missing for 2 months, you should know that, he said irritably, not quite believing the woman was as stupid as she was coming across. We at the Ministry believe that is a lie, she said, shooting a glance at Dumbledore. However, if Mr. Potter is not here, then he is playing truant and will be taken in to Ministry care at the earliest opportunity, she concluded, leaving the room. Prefects, please escort the members of your house to the dormitories, Dumbledore requested, every hint of his twinkle missing. All the students made their way to their common rooms in silence, some confused and some thoughtful. Draco Malfoy was confused. He had no reason not to believe his father when he told them that Potter had been killed by the Dark Lord. But why was the Ministry insisting he was alive? He shook his head, knowing that his father wouldn't say it if he didn't know for sure. And he knew that most of the Ministry workers were buffoons. Even Fudge himself would be nothing without his father, and the money he generously donated. Potter was dead. He had to be. Being missing for 2 months in the Wizarding without training was a death sentence. He made his way to his dorm lost in thoughts, and decided that it was not his problem. He had more important things to worry about, like how he could use his newfound power to get what he wanted. The members of Gryffindor were solemn. Ron and Hermione were questioned incessantly about the whereabouts of Harry, but they told all the members of the house that you simply knew nothing and had not heard from him. Neville Longbottom looked at his fellow housemates in sorrow. Only last year they had turned their back on the missing teen, and now they decided to be concerned for his welfare. He pitied them all, but kept his mouth shut as he promised Harry he would. He went silently to his bed and allowed the rest of the house to wallow in their own emotions. He knew that Harry was okay, and to him that was all that mattered, until Harry decided when to make an appearance. He looked forward to that day, knowing that things would be very different. Break! The last month for Harry had essentially been a string of repetitive days. He would wake in the morning and eat and train both magically and physically throughout the day. The regime he had been following had benefited even more than he could imagine. He felt strong and healthy and looked the best he ever had. He had grown a further 2 inches, had filled out considerably, and had to replace his wardrobe entirely. His skill with a wand was coming on in leaps and bounds, and his movement was both becoming exceptionally fast and graceful. He was happy with his progress, but was under no illusion that he needed to keep at it. He still had a lot more work to do. After writing to Neville, he had received only one other piece of mail, and that had come courtesy of the goblins that had sent him a magical sphere to record the parcel tongue prompts, so they could access the carcass in the chamber. They had written to Dumbledore, and he had agreed to allow them access to the school to retrieve the corpse, hoping that the wealth it would provide to Harry would help him in his endeavors. The old man had respected what he assumed was the teen's wish to be left alone, but passed on his greetings and offered help if he needed it. Harry was grateful to Dumbledore, but Arcturus was clearly not fond of the man for reasons of his own. He would then spend several hours in the evening on magical theory and learning the syllabus for the last few years of school, and even studying beyond it the way that he knew his family had. He found that in the peace and quiet of his room, he could excel at his subjects, but again, felt disappointed in his less than impressive first few years at Hogwarts. On the night he saw the files belonging to both his parents and grandparents, he had vowed to do better academically, and he was well on his way to living up to them, the way he desired. Today felt strange to Harry, knowing that he should be on the Express and returning to school, but in a way, he was glad that he wasn't. He had settled into his routine and knew that he was benefiting much more being here than he would at school. He did miss his friends, but he no longer missed them the way he had. He didn't hold anything against them for not writing, and felt no dislike towards them, but he did feel let down by the apparent lack of care they had shown. It was not something he dwelled on much. He simply didn't have the time. He was busy during all waking hours and only stopped to rest during meal times and when he was unwinding in the evening before he slept. No, Harry was not bitter, but he was certainly indifferent. Arcturus had maintained his usual routine of being absent during the day, and Harry had long since stopped wondering where it was. He went. Harry knew he was busy taking care of the Horcruxes and knew better than to question the man. He would ask for help if wanted or needed, and Harry found that he truly did trust him. He would return at random times and test Harry in all aspects of his training and studying, offering pointers and advice where he felt necessary. He did not, however, baby the boy in any way, and largely left him alone to be responsible for his own training and studies. He knew that seeing the files had lit a fire under the teen and had made him much more studious, which he was pleased to see. The last few days had been a concern for Harry. It began when he had started feeling lethargic and a little weak. His physical workout had left him drained, and his magic had been erratic at best during his spell work. Initially, he had concluded he was having an off day, and simply shrugged it off. It wasn't until the next day that he felt something wasn't right, when he barely made it halfway through his exercises before he had to rest, and even after that, his energy levels did not replete. It was today that he had woken to find that even walking to the drawing room for breakfast had him sweating and gasping for air, and he knew that something must be really wrong. Not wanting to burden Arcturus with his problems, he sat at the table and began to slowly eat what he could, and that wasn't much. The older man eyed the boy critically as he entered the room. He looked peaky and quite sickly. He continued to watch him as he ate a very meager amount compared to what he usually would. He took in the symptoms he could see and come to only 2 possible conclusions. "Are you sick?" he asked the boy, who jumped at the sudden interruption to his meal. "I'm just feeling a little run down," Harry said dismissively. Arcturus frowned at the boy, knowing he wasn't being entirely truthful. "Have you been vomiting?" he asked. Harry shook his head. "No, I don't feel sick. Everything is just tiring and my magic is a little off. Maybe I'm training too much." He tried hopefully. The older man was skeptical of the boy's theory, knowing that he wouldn't feel this way 2 months into training. The tired phase passed weeks ago. "What do you mean your magic is off?" he asked. "Are your spells either under or overpowered?" he questioned, frowning. Harry nodded at the question. "Both," he said. "The power is inconsistent, and I have little control over it," he admitted. "I see," Arcturus replied. "Do you feel too hot or too cold?" he questioned further. "Neither," Harry replied, confused. "I feel normal apart from tiredness and my magic acting strangely." "Ah!" Arcturus intoned, surprised. "Come here," he commanded, beckoning to the boy. Harry complied and found himself on the receiving end of several diagnostic charms and spells he did not recognize. "Just as I thought," the man said triumphantly. "It seems you are going through an early magical maturity," he proclaimed. "Oh, what's that?" Harry asked inquisitively. It was something he had never heard of. "It's the final stage in your magical growth in which you reach your peak powers and your core finishes stabilizing," the older man answered knowledgeably. "It doesn't usually happen until you are between 18 and 21 years old, though," he added, frowning. "Why is it happening to me now, then?" Harry asked, with worry evident in his voice. Arcturus continued to frown while he considered his answer. The reasons became obvious with little thought. He looked at the boy critically again, before he answered. "Several reasons, I think," he began. "Powerful wizards tend to mature much more quickly, and there is no doubt that you are more than an exceptionally powerful wizard," he continued. "I'm also guessing that the taint of Riddle hindered your growth considerably, both magically and physically. With that gone, you being healthy and having grown as much as you have recently, it seems that your body can now cope with the mature magic," he concluded, thoughtfully. "I think Charles went through his he was much like you until 5th year. When he came back, he was bigger, faster, and stronger in his body and magic," he explained. Harry thought about what he had been told, but could only nod in agreement. He had begun to believe that he was certainly no average wizard. Since the piece of riddle had been removed, everything felt much more easy. Even studying and absorbing information permanently was a breeze. Without the constant aches the scar had given him. He performed spells with ease, and it just kept getting easier the more he did it. "How long will it last?" he asked, with a hint of concern. Arcturus shrugged. "For the average wizard, it's usually over in a few days." "How long have you felt like this?" he questioned the boy. "This is the 3rd day, but the worst by far," Harry answered, feeling worried again. "It is usually longer for more powerful wizards. Mine was around 5 days, if I remember correctly," he explained. Harry felt a little better knowing that, but he could not ignore the exhaustion he was feeling. "Is there anything I can do to make it easier?" he asked, hopefully. The older man shook his head. "No, you just have to let it pass," he answered. "Just relax and sleep as much as you can, and don't perform any magic or it will make it worse," he warned. "Use the time for your studies and theory work, and let your body run its course," he finished firmly. Harry nodded, knowing that the older man was speaking sense. He bid the man farewell and returned to his room to begin his day working on his theory. Arcturus remained in his chair for some time, pondering the boy he was sharing his house with. He couldn't help but marvel a little at the boy and the potential he possessed. "He will do you proud, old friend," he said quietly to the empty room, and with that he put his usual disguise in place and disapparated to carry out his business for the day. It was the next day that a surprise article appeared in the Daily Prophet. Harry was in bed, feeling even worse than he had the day before. Even going to the bathroom was a real effort. Elgar bought him his breakfast in the paper, and he gaped at the article before reading. Harry Potter, Dead or Alive, by Marcia Wood. "We at the Prophet have been speculating the whereabouts of our once young hero for the past 2 months and have yielded no results. His home address away from school is one of the best kept secrets in the wizarding world, and we simply assumed that he would return to school after the summer break had finished. But that was not the case. According to an anonymous source within the school, Potter did not show for the start of term, and it seems that no one knows where he is. Even Albus Dumbledore appears to be in the dark, or he is keeping secrets from us all. So where is young Mr. Potter? Has he been killed and it is being kept quiet, or is he truly simply missing? We at the Prophet are keen for any information regarding the status of Mr. Potter and are offering a 1,000 galleon reward to anyone who provides information that leads to Mr. Potter being found." Harry folded up the paper and placed it on the bedside table. The article had Fudge's work all over it, and Harry had no doubt that the minister was in it for his own gain. He shook his head and ate his breakfast before reading as much as he could before he would fall asleep again, as he knew he would. The following week saw the Prophet speculating further on his fate. Several people had come forward claiming they had seen him, some as far away as South America. He began to look forward to the daily paper. It entertained him to no end reading the different theories that they were coming up with. His favorite was that he had taken a holiday to Avila Conclave and had either lost track of time or had died from exhaustion. If only they knew the truth, he chuckled to himself. It wasn't until the 10th day of his ordeal that he began to feel better again. It had lasted much longer than he or Arcturus had anticipated it would, but he was glad that it was now coming to an end. He had achieved a large amount of academic work, but he was beginning to get restless and couldn't wait until he could get back to training. He knew it would take another couple of days, but he could wait. His keenness saw him able to begin training again on the 13th day. He could have started a couple of days before, but Arcturus insisted he waited to be sure. With his resting days over, he had a lot of catching up to do. Break. On the surface, the first 2 weeks at Hogwarts hadn't differed much to the previous years, but there was a definite undercurrent of tension felt by all. The professors taught their classes as normal, and the schedule within the castle was the same. It was the rumors of the return of Tom Riddle and the placement of Dolores Umbridge as the new defense professor that had created the atmosphere within the school. It was clear to all in the castle that Umbridge was not there to teach anything useful to the students. She was there as Fudge's lackey and nothing more. Her lessons were the worst any had ever attended, if they could be called lessons at all. The classes were all instructed to do the same thing regardless of age and ability. They all read from the same book, and questions were simply brushed aside. She clearly favored the pure-blood students. That was undeniable. But her favor was given more so to those in Slytherin house. Thus, the tension between the houses was more prevalent and became more so as each day passed. Dolores Umbridge sat in her office contemplating her situation. She had no desire to be at Hogwarts, surrounded by insolent little brats. She truly hated children. They disgusted her beyond comprehension. However, she was, if anything, a very shrewd and intelligent woman. She was not particularly gifted in any branch of magic, but her cunning and ability to work situations to her advantage had seen her rise to her very senior position within the ministry. She knew that being at Hogwarts was advantageous for her. From here she could glean much information and learn everything she needed to ensure her position, no matter the outcome. She hated Dumbledore and was more than a little envious of his achievements. But she was no fool. She knew there had to be some truth to what he had been saying in regards to the return of the Dark Lord, and decided she would take a wait-and-see approach. And Hogwarts was perfect for that. Here she could be away from the ministry and out of the direct line of fire that would surely be aimed there. Here she could quietly gain favor with students who she knew had family, who had been aligned with the Dark Lord, and here she could remain somewhat neutral. She was no Death Eater, but she sympathized with much of the pure-blood doctrine they spouted. She, as a pure-blood herself, could see the benefits of the Dark Lord seizing control and implementing new laws and an infrastructure that she could truly gain from. She may not have been a Death Eater, but she did harbor her own cruel tendencies that she could indulge in while she was at Hogwarts, and none would be the wiser if she played her hand correctly. She enjoyed seeing people suffer, not suffer in an obvious way of outright torture, but a way that would see them suffer over a period of time. Her weapon of choice was a blood quill, and she knew she would get an opportunity at the school to use it. The atmosphere within the wizarding world was enough to distract most from the tall tales told by a child. And if the little brats seemed that they would talk, then a memory charm would suffice. She would just need to be cautious about how much she would use the quill. It would not do to cause permanent scarring and have questions asked. Yes, Hogwarts, despite the presence of annoying children, was the perfect place for her to be. The other problem she was facing was what on earth had happened to the Potter boy. She had always been curious as to how a little half-blood baby could have been the cause of the fall of the Dark Lord. She was curious to meet him, and not just because Fudge wanted him found. She wanted to see for herself what was so special about him. Was he truly powerful enough to do what he had at such a young age? Or was he simply mediocre, as she had heard from Fudge and Lucius Malfoy? She did not take anything Malfoy said as gospel. In all honesty, she found him to be a pompous moron who spent far too much time looking in the mirror and kissing the arse of anyone who could better his position. To her, he was nothing more than a glorified bootlicker, but he had become a powerful one, and he certainly needed to be pandered to an extent. The Potter mystery certainly had her flummoxed, but seeing as he didn't arrive at Hogwarts, all she could do at this point in time was to wait to see if he would emerge from the woodwork or if his corpse would appear somewhere. She had both Granger and Weasley in her office at the earliest possible opportunity, and with the help of Veritas Verum and memory charms, had learnt an awful lot about the young man, but they had no idea where he was or if he was definitely alive. Waiting was all she could do here and now, and while she was waiting, she would have some fun for herself. Break. The 2 weeks since the teenagers had left his home had been the most peaceful Sirius Black had had for many years. With the departure of the children, the rest of the Weasleys had returned to their own home, much to the pleasure of the remaining occupant of Grimmauld Place. The one problem with the peace was the new sense of worry he felt. He was aware that Harry had not returned to school, and this had him concerned. Remus had left on an errand for Dumbledore and had been gone over a week, leaving the other marauder alone for much of the time. Members of the Order would stop by from time to time, but Sirius suspected it was only to ensure that he had not left or done something foolish. He had been tempted but knew that it would be unwise, and he wanted to be there for Harry when he came out of hiding. Sirius had no desire to go back to Azkaban, and he knew he was safe behind the walls of the Black Home. He spent most of his time in the library preparing for the inevitable battles that would take place. He knew he would and could be useful against the Death Eaters, and pledged himself to studying and practicing. It had been a long time since his Aurora days, and he was certainly out of shape and not as sharp as he once was. That would have to change, and while he had the time, he would hone his skills to the best of his ability. Break. Harry had just completed his first day of training since his magical maturity had finished, and he was quite astounded at the difference in himself. Physically, he did not tire as he did, and his stamina and endurance had increased tenfold. In regards to his magic, he was at first disappointed in the effects of his curses, but soon realized that said effects were not based on power. A curse was simply a curse, and would run its course regardless of power, and could not be influenced by adding further magical power to it. The key difference was in the counter-cursing. It took much more power to counter the curse if more power was added to it, and Harry knew this was quite a development. The real difference he noticed was in his impact spells, and spells that had a physical effect. His bludgeoning hex was the first he attempted in this category, and noticed the difference in power and damage immediately. Instead of the dummy that was hit gliding across the floor at high speed and hitting the wall, it simply flew through the air and crashed into wall, breaking several bones. He saw the same in his fire and water spells. Instead of a stream of reasonable force, his wand would erupt in what could only be described as a geyser of his chosen element. His conjuring was much easier also. He still had to visualize what he wanted to the same extent, but the use of magic felt much less and did not leave him drained as it had previously. Overall, Harry was very happy with the unexpected increases he had, and believed even more so that he was no longer an average wizard. He had seen the spells performed by other wizards and witches, and none he had seen even came close to what he was now capable of. He was very aware, however, that power was only one aspect of being a great wizard. Mostly it was down to skill, and winning a fight was not solely dependent on the amount of power one possessed. And he knew that he had to at least equal his power with the skill in which he wielded it with. He would not slack and rely on his power, but he would train even harder, knowing that he had quite the gap to close. Harry was interrupted from his reflections by the arrival of Arcturus, who was looking as stoic as ever. The older man looked thoughtfully at the spell damage in the room and the fresh scorch marks on the walls and floor. "How do you feel?" he asked the teen, who looked surprisingly fresh. "I feel fine, sir," Harry replied. "I don't feel tired how I usually would by now, and my spells are a lot more powerful," he added. The older man looked appraisingly at the boy and nodded in his usual way. "Show me," he stated simply. Harry obliged by demonstrating his spell work and the more noticeable differences in it. "Impressive," Arcturus said in an almost praising tone. "What about your curses?" he asked. "They are much harder to counter," Harry answered, frowning. "But they don't work any faster than normal. That's because they work based on time and not power," he finished. "I see you've been reading up on your theory," the older man replied, neutrally. "Yes, sir, I don't want to disappoint my parents," Harry explained shyly. Arcturus nodded his head again at the boy's reasoning. Inside, he was pleased that he had begun to dedicate himself to his studies, and knew he would do well as expected if he continued this way. "Show me your flame whip," Arcturus requested. This was a spell that had taken a fair amount of practice for Harry to produce, and one he had not tried throughout his training that day. To his surprise, he managed it with much more ease than he had anticipated, and the whip was considerably longer and thicker than he had managed to conjure before. "Good," Arcturus said simply. "You will need to practice with that to master controlling it, and also work more on conjuring and banishing objects. It can be a very effective weapon if mastered," he remarked knowingly. Yes, sir, Harry answered simply. Now that is out of the way, I need you to accompany me on a small trip. Arcturus began seriously. It seems that our friend Riddle has been recruiting, and one of my elves have informed me of some new guests in our country, and I want you to come and see what you will be up against in due course, he explained further. Harry knew from Arcturus' tone that this was something serious and adopted the impassive mask that had been taught to him by the man. He placed his wands in his holsters and indicated that he was ready. The older man took him by the arm, and with a pop, they had vanished. The duo appeared in a forest that Harry could tell was close to the sea. He could smell the salt in the air and hear the distant crashing of waves onto a rocky shore. He began casting charms on himself to hide his scent and cancel the sound of his footsteps. He didn't disillusion himself knowing that he needed to be seen by his companion. The older man nodded and cast the same spells on himself and began leading the way into the thicker and deeper parts of the wooded area. They walked on in silence for what seemed to be miles, and eventually Harry began to hear the sounds of activity ahead of them. In the distance, he could see an area lit by fire and cautiously followed the older man to the outskirts of a clearing. What he saw in the clearing shocked him to his core. 3 men were sat in the clearing, one in which Harry recognized as Buckbeak's would-be executioner. McNair, the other 2 men were dressed in black robes and were sat around the fire, but it wasn't the men that had Harry worried. Around the men sat a collection of around 20 giants, completely brutal-looking and bigger than he could ever have imagined. He looked at Arcturus questioningly, and the older man shook his head in resignation. Things now seemed even more real to the boy. He knew now that this was a real war, and it wasn't only Riddle that would be a problem. It made him wonder what else he was up to and what other creatures he had managed to bring to his side. He was distracted by the biggest of the giants as he stood and stretched tiredly. It was not the giant itself that had distracted, but what was attached to his hip by a crude and blood-soaked rope. They were heads bigger than the average human, but not as big as a giant. It was then that Harry recognized them. The faces had been quite badly mutilated, but the shaggy hair and beard of one was familiar, and it did not take a genius to figure out who the other had belonged to. He felt a wave of emotion overcome him. He felt sick, upset, and extremely angry. He felt the magic rolling of him in waves in his fury, as did Arcturus, who moved in to calm down the boy. No, the older man whispered dangerously, "All you will achieve is us being killed, and it will be for nothing," he said through gritted teeth. Harry swallowed back the emotion hard and nodded at the older man, but felt no better. He knew war would be gruesome, but he had not expected to see the head of his first ever friend worn as an accessory, as a trophy, as casually as it was. He would never forget the sight of the remaining appendage of Rubeus Hagrid, gentle half-giant, adorning the hip of a giant, and although he did not know Madame Maxime well, he felt a wave of sadness for her also, knowing she had died trying to prevent Riddle gaining further allies. He was shaken from his stupor by Arcturus, who took him by the arm and dragged them away to a safe distance where he could apparate them home. They appeared again in the training room, where Harry immediately removed his wand and fired a blasting hex at the dummy that exploded into thousands of tiny pieces. He breathed heavily in his rage, and it took some time for him to calm down to a point that he could listen to Arcturus. "I did not know we would see that," he explained to the fuming team. "Dumbledore had no reason to send him to them. He must have known it was useless," he finished, shaking his head. "He didn't deserve to die like that," Harry replied, attempting to keep the emotion out of his voice. "He was a good man and wouldn't harm a fly," he added sadly. "Then he has no place in a war," Arcturus declared. He should have been smart enough to keep out of it. He was too loyal to Dumbledore, and his loyalty and inability and lack of skill got him killed. "You see what it is you are up against now?" he questioned, not wanting an answer. Harry said nothing but used a moment of silence to compose himself. He would make them pay for what they had done to his friend. He was both sad and angry, and each emotion was fighting for dominance, but Harry would allow none to win. He schooled his features into his impassive mask before he spoke. "They will pay," he stated, with a cold edge to his voice. "You will need to know how to kill a giant," the older man replied. "Go and read your grandfather's journal from June 1915. You will see how he used to do it." The older man explained. Harry moved to exit the room, feeling the need to be alone becoming overwhelming, but he was stopped before he could reach the door by the older man. This has happened sooner than expected, but the war has still barely begun, he explained. We still have time, but we need to start putting things together, he continued. I think it is time for a family reunion, both to get some allies and to rock the boat a little, he finished with a cruel smile. Harry nodded and made his way to his room. As he closed the door behind him, the first tear sprung from his eye, and he no longer tried to hold it back. He felt no shame in crying for the loss of his giant friend, and would grieve in his moments alone, but he would be damned if he allowed anyone to see it. He knew being compassionate was not a weakness as such, but he knew that concealing any and all emotions would be beneficial to him, and had decided some time ago to hide them all. He would feel, but he would not show. That was his promise to himself. When he was alone, however, he would release the emotions he felt, whether it be anger, sadness, joy, or happiness. He wept a little more for his friend before retrieving the journal he had been instructed to, and quickly found what he was looking for and began to read. June 13th, I encountered and fought my first giant today, and let me say that what you read and hear does no justice to them at all. They are truly a sight to behold, and a fight I will never forget. They are very tough and resistant to almost all magic. The only spell that worked effectively was my flame whip. But even that was not enough to defeat a giant. You need to use physical attacks and aim for the legs and head. I wasted a lot of time trying to curse the beast, and the spells did nothing. I managed to conjure and banish metal spheres to bring it to its knees, after they eventually broke, and sent countless arrows into its torso and head. It did not stop fighting until I removed its head by banishing a large sword I had conjured at its neck. That in itself took a lot of power, and I would not recommend it unless you know you are a capable wizard. Harry now understood why Arcturus had instructed him to work on his conjuring, banishing and flame whip further. He placed the journal back in his grandfather's trunk and got into bed. He felt a sense of numbness overcome him as the death of Hagrid sunk in. He would make sure his friend did not die in vain, and vowed to himself that he would do all he could to make sure he could limit the advantage the giants would have in battle, even if he had to take them all down himself. He shuddered at that thought, and slowly fell into an uneasy slumber, knowing that the war was beginning to shape into something that would not be easily concluded. Halloween had come quickly for both Harry and Arcturus, and the last 6 weeks had been busy. Something within the boy had changed since the night they had seen the giants, and the change was one all too familiar for the older man. The boy was simply no longer a boy. He carried himself differently. He trained with complete abandon, and he never once revealed even an ounce of what he was feeling. He had truly mastered hiding his emotions, and the older man couldn't help but think that his long-past friend had risen from the dead, and was possessing the young man in front of him. Yes, the final part of Harry's childhood innocence was gone, and he seemed to have come full circle. He had become what he needed to, and the older man now believed he could not only survive, he believed he could win. For Harry, the changes had come naturally. For the first time in his life, he felt as though he could and was being the way he was intended to be without the neglect and constant criticism he had received throughout his life. He hadn't made any conscious changes, but he did notice them himself. He was no longer shy and meek. He was quietly confident and felt even more so as each day passed. The last month and a half had seen him grow in every way in leaps and bounds, and he was very proud of himself. Physically, he was healthy, fit, and strong. He had grown to be almost 6 feet tall, and the training he had been doing had packed on considerable muscle mass, especially when he compared himself to his previously undernourished frame. He was a true athlete, and one would only need to look into his eyes to see the differences. His eyes continuously glowed with a gently dancing but bright emerald flame. But that gentle flame would become a roaring inferno in an instant at his will. Now that his magic was stable and strong, his body finally reflected it, and his spell work was now simply phenomenal. He was very fast and powerful, and moved with the same grace he had seen his grandfather move with. He worked tirelessly on his magic, creating spell chains and combinations that were devastating. He knew he was not ready to face Riddle yet, but he knew that even now he would give any of his followers serious problems in a fight, and was confident he would soon be capable of defeating any of them. He had begun training to face multiple opponents, and had found his family magic was perfect for this type of fighting. He excelled in combat situations, and when he watched himself back through the pensieve, he himself couldn't believe that the young man he was seeing was himself. Seeing the severed head of his friend had truly woken him to the reality of war, and that reality had created what he had become. He was now a warrior, and he knew that Tom Riddle would rue the day he went after the Potters. If it was the last thing he did, Harry would avenge those of his blood, those who were taken from him all too soon. He had decided weeks before that he wanted to visit his parents and his grandparents' grave on this day. If anything, he wanted to see where they rested and pay his respects to those who he had finally gotten to know over the last several months. He wasn't seeking closure on their deaths. He knew he wouldn't get it until the day he ended Riddle. He hadn't broached the subject with the older man yet, but he knew he would not deny him. Arcturus may be a surly git most of the time, but he understood the worth and value of family. Harry made his way into the drawing room, as he did every day, to have his breakfast, and the usual short chat with the older man. He entered the room silently, took his seat, and helped himself to his oats and fruit. When the older man said nothing, for a few minutes, it was Harry who broke the silence. "Where are my family buried?" he asked neutrally. The older man did not look at all surprised by the question, but looked at his younger companion critically before answering. "They will be buried in the Potter Mausoleum in Godric's Hollow," the older man replied with a frown. "Have you never been?" he asked in a quietly dangerous voice that Harry knew meant that he was displeased. "No, sir, my aunt and uncle never took me, and no one has ever told me before. All I know is that my parents were murdered on Halloween, and I was taken to them," he answered casually. "And you want to go?" Arcturus stated. Tonight was the reply he received. The older man looked at Harry and knew there was no stopping him, even if he wanted to. He had become sure of himself and even stubborn the same way Charles was. He shook his head at young man, but nodded at his request. "We will go later tonight, but it could be risky. The Ministry or Riddle could be keeping watch on the place. I will send Elgar to scout it out for the day, and if necessary, we will come up with a way we can go without being bothered," he finished. "Thank you, sir," Harry said, respectfully. "I really do appreciate it." They continued their breakfast in silence until the older man had finished. He sent Elgar to watch the graveyard before opening a letter that had been delivered to him during the meal. The letters will be going out today, so we will be having our meeting tomorrow," he intoned with a steely glint in his eye. Harry just nodded at the man. He was looking forward to seeing Sirius again, but knew this was not going to be the happy reunion with his godfather he had hoped for. This was family business, and Harry knew that it was going to be tense, especially with the occupants not having been in a room together for many years. He finished his breakfast and made his way to start his training for the day. He wanted the day to pass quickly, as he was both eager and nervous about visiting the final resting place of his family. The next couple of days would be interesting, at the very least, for Harry Potter. Break. Today found Sirius Black in a very somber and depressed mood. 14 years ago to the day, his life had plummeted into the downward spiral that would haunt him forever. He lost his best friend and his wife, and because of his own actions, he had lost his godson also. Sirius Black was innocent of the crimes he had been sent to Azkaban for, but in his own heart he knew he was guilty. He was guilty of recklessness that had seen his one chance at redemption be squandered by his own actions. He was guilty of abandoning the boy he loved as his own son, and he was guilty of letting his friends down in the duty he had promised to them if such events were to occur. He knew he would always carry that guilt with him, and wished nothing more than to be able to turn back time and change what happened that night. Alas, he knew that was not possible. Instead, he wished for one more chance to be there for Harry the way he should always have been. He wished that he could have raised him in the loving home he would have had with him, and more than anything, he wished he was with the boy right now so he could keep him safe from what he knew was coming. The past 6 weeks had seen Sirius at the busiest he had ever been. He trained morning, noon, and night, and began taking care of himself. He ate regular meals and would sleep soundly due to the exhaustion he would feel at the end of every day. He looked and felt healthier than he had in years. He was no longer emaciated and sallow-skinned, and his hair was sleek and shiny as it once was. The only thing that remained that demonstrated the hellish years in Azkaban was the haunted look in his eyes, a look that would forever be there. It had taken a while for him to recover, much longer than he had anticipated. He hadn't expected his magic to be so badly affected by his stay in Azkaban, but it had taken several weeks for it to stabilize and be the way it once was. He had honed his skills so that he was now at least on par with what they used to be. Sirius Black was a skilled wizard and was no slouch in a fight. He hadn't learned his family magic due to its dark nature, but he had learned more than enough to take people down when he needed to. He was a Black after all. He was currently sat at the breakfast table contemplating how he would spend his day. He didn't want to train, knowing his heart really wasn't in it today, but he did not want to be idle either. Before he could decide, his thoughts were interrupted by a sharp tapping on the window. He frowned at the owl, knowing that it was not likely to be good news. He opened the window to allow the bird access, and as soon as he relieved it of its burden, it exited immediately. He recognized the wax seal of Gringotts and felt his stomach give an involuntary quiver. He knew this was not going to be a good thing. He thought for a moment before continuing. He knew he didn't know the bank money, as he had never had a loan and lived only on his salary and the gold his Uncle Alfred had left him. He knew he wasn't due to inherit anything, as he had been cast out of his family at the age of 16 by his mother. He was at a loss and decided that opening it was his only option. What he read surprised him greatly, but also made him nervous. Dear Mr. Black, I am writing to you as the goblin in charge of the Black accounts here at Gringotts. It seems that there are many things that need to be discussed pertaining to family business and other sensitive affairs that shall not be mentioned in writing. I request an audience with yourself tomorrow at 6 p.m. to discuss these most urgent matters. I am aware of your current status and have therefore turned this letter into a portkey that will place you outside the designated room in which we will meet at the time mentioned above. You have a magical vow that this is no trap and you will be safe within our walls from capture. Yours in service, Forcho, Black Family Account Manager. The letter glowed a bright blue, sealing the vow, and the man simply stared at the piece of parchment in shock, and as a nervous wreck, he did not know what to make of the letter, but knew it was not wise to ignore a request for a meeting from the goblin. He would have to attend in secret, of course, but now he was truly curious. He sat back at the table and continued to ponder what business the goblins could possibly have with him. Break. Andromeda Tonks arrived to work in her usual fashion. She sat at her desk and looked over case notes for the coming week before fetching her morning coffee. Despite the setbacks in her life, she had become a very successful lawyer and was proud of what she achieved. At the age of 18, she had fled her family home when it was announced that she was to be married off to a man she had not chosen. She had already found love and had spent the last 3 years hiding it from her family because they would never approve of her choice in man. Her now husband Ted was a Muggle-born, and her being a Black meant that he would not be an acceptable choice. She had always been proud of her heritage and proud that she had been born into a prominent family, but her pride ended at the bigotry her family was well known for. She held nothing against anyone who was not born into a wizarding family and did not buy into the pureblood supremacy that was prevalent in the wizarding community. Her husband himself had always been talented and very intelligent, and he and her complemented each other well. Their daughter had inherited talents beyond both of them and seemed to have taken the best of both of their genes. Not only was she powerful in her own right, but she had inherited the metamorph ability from the Black line. She was a fine aura, and Andromeda was proud of her only child. Despite the happiness she felt, she regretted that all but one member of her family had turned their backs on her, but she remained stubborn and married Ted Tonks anyway. Her cousin Sirius was the only one who had remained in contact with her, and he maintained that contact until he went to Azkaban. Andromeda had always been unsure of her cousin's guilt. She knew that James was nothing less than a brother to him, and he truly idolized Lily Potter and respected her. She had tried to visit him on several occasions just to ascertain whether he was guilty or innocent, but she had been rebuffed on every attempt. She had even been unsuccessful in trying to obtain the paperwork pertaining to her cousin, being told that it was senior ministry staff and for Aura access only. She had long resigned herself to the fact that she would get nowhere in her line of inquiries, so she simply let it rest. To her, it would be one of those things she had no control over, and one of those things that would have to remain a mystery. She had had a fairly happy childhood made easier by her two sisters, who she had adored. Her older sister Bella was beautiful, intelligent, and a fierce duelist, and growing up, Andromeda had always wanted to be like her. She trained with her throughout her younger years, and they would gossip as all young girls would, but that changed when Bella returned to Hogwarts for her 7th year. She had been seduced by the pureblood movement headed by you-know-who and had started to become what she was now known for, an insane killer. It had broken Andromeda's heart to see her sister take the path she had chosen, and no matter how much she pleaded with her older sibling, she knew her mind had already been made up. Her younger sister Narcissa was always the favored and spoiled one. Being the youngest, she would always get away with everything and would charm anyone she came across. She was a talented witch in her own right, but favored potions and charms above dueling. Andromeda always believed that she would make a fine healer, but that wasn't to be. Her father had matched her with Lucius Malfoy, and any hopes and dreams the youngest black sister had died with that match. She had become nothing more than a trophy and had truly adopted the life of a Malfoy. She looked down on everyone and became a snob and an emotionless shell of what she once was. She had spent her life wasting away in an oversized house and only left to shop or attend events draped on the arm of her buffoon of a husband. To Andromeda, the stagnation of her sister was wasteful, and the wizarding world could have benefited from a woman with her skill and the care she had once shown. She returned to her desk to begin her workday and had barely begun to put together her most current case when she was interrupted by a gentle tapping on the window. Thinking it was a new case, she opened the window to admit the bird. It wasn't until the owl had left that she recognized the Gringotts' seal. She had already received her monthly statement, so was confused as to what the letter could include. She opened it and was completely shocked by the contents. Dear Mrs. Tonksney, Black. I am writing to you as the goblin in charge of the Black accounts here at Gringotts. It seems that there are many things that need to be discussed pertaining to family business and other sensitive affairs that shall not be mentioned in writing. I request an audience with yourself tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. to discuss these most urgent matters. I would ask that you also bring your daughter Nymphadora Tonks and husband Theodore Tonks, as the business discussed is likely to affect them also. Yours in service, Barchoke, the Black family account manager. The letter had Andromeda worried. Was it possible that her father had somehow created a marriage contract for her daughter without her knowledge? Or was it possible that it pertained to herself? She was no longer a Black and hadn't been for 25 years. She knew it was unlikely to be anything good, and could only hope that whatever it was not detrimental to her family. She quickly put everything away and grabbed the letter to head home. She had to inform her family of this development and plan accordingly. Break. The mood within the castle had shifted from an undertone of tenseness to one of caution for many. The appointment of Umbridge had led to many strange happenings. Educational degrees had been implemented for several trivial reasons, and those in the school bright enough to understand knew it was done to control them and dampen any kind of spirit. People would be given detention with the toad and return confused and could not remember what they had done in the time spent with her. Hermione, not having served a detention with the woman, had taken her concerns to McGonagall, but had been told to keep her head down and let the storm pass. The professors were worried. The students who had attended the detentions had shown signs of having their memory modified, but they knew it would be difficult to prove unless they caught the woman in the act. Their positions themselves were precarious at best and were undergoing inspections by the odious woman. They were in no position to investigate, fearing for their own livelihoods. Although it was upsetting and worrying, the children did recover, and there had so far been no physical evidence apparent to them. For now, they knew if they wanted to retain their jobs, they had to simply wait for this to pass and hope that it would be over soon. The cardigan-clad woman had firmly pressed her will on all in Castle, and the days had become dark indeed under her tyranny. Today was a day that Hermione and Ron had been planning for several weeks now. They knew to pass their O-doubles, and to be able to defend themselves when the time was right, they needed to be taught properly. They had taken it upon themselves to start a group in which they and their peers could study together what they would need to pass their exams and be able to hold their own in a fight. The castle was in a much better spirit today, as the students would get a respite from the rules the Toad had implemented. It was the first Hogsmeade trip, and the duo, along with Neville and Ginny, had chosen today to hold their meeting to garner interest in their plan. They had spent the last several weeks quietly putting out word of their idea to people they knew they could trust. All in all, they were expecting around 15 people to attend. They were currently sat in the Hogshead pub in the north of the village, waiting for people to arrive. They had chosen this bar, hoping it was far enough away from prying ears. Knowing that very few people came here, they had only been sat with their drinks for around 5 minutes when the door opened, and a group of around 30 students, led by Fred, George, and Lee Jordan, entered the pub. There were students from all houses, including a few Slytherin. Upon seeing the group, Hermione stormed towards the twins, clearly panicked. "How many people did you tell?" she hissed at them quietly. "Only a few," George replied, shrugging. "It seems that your plan is much more popular than you thought it would be, Miss Granger," Fred said, with an impish grin. "Barkeep," he yelled. "Butterbeers all round," he finished, gesturing to the group, and took a seat next to his brother, where the rest of the students had assembled. "What the hell are the snakes doing here?" Ron questioned angrily. "You know they can't be trusted." "Well, little brother of mine," Fred intoned, wrapping an arm around his younger brother's shoulders, "it seems that Miss Greengrass here overheard us talking about it in the library and insisted that her and her 2 companions be allowed to join," he explained. "Yes, she was very insistent." George cut in. "My left cheek is still ringing from that hex," he added, rubbing his posterior. "They can't be trusted," Ron reiterated angrily. "Oh, shut up," Weasley Daphne interrupted. "If we wanted to drop you in, it would be Umbridge here instead of us," she pointed out. Before Ron could reply, Hermione chimed in. "It's okay, Ron," she said, attempting to placate the irate redhead. "I have runes and arithmancy with Daphne and Tracy. I'm sure it will be fine," she finished, not sounding overly sure of herself. "Well, I don't trust them, and they will drop us in it the first chance they get," Ron growled. "Can we just get on with it?" Neville piped up irritably. "It would be bad if we were caught here like this." "Fine, fine," Hermione said, and went on to explain the idea to the group. "So, I was thinking that the older years could help us with our ODLLs, and we could all chip in on everything else," she concluded. The group remained silent, lost in their own thoughts. They all knew what Granger had suggested made sense, and that they had a much better chance of passing their exams if they worked together. It was a much better prospect than relying on Umbridge and her sorry idea of what teaching was. "If Harry was here, I would have got him to teach us," Hermione said, breaking the silence. "Potter?" Tracy Davis broke in. "What could he teach us we don't already know?" she asked. "And is he even alive? Surely you know something. He is your best friend." There was a majority agreement within the group, demonstrated by rigorous nodding by many. "Harry is by far the best at defense in our year and has actual experience," Ron answered irritably. "What? Because he defeated a Dark Lord before he could hold a wand?" Astoria Greengrass asked. "It was luck, not skill." "He didn't mean that experience," Hermione retorted angrily and quickly put her hand over her mouth once she realized her mistake. "And no, none of us have heard from him since before he went in the maze," she answered sadly. "Well, what experience did he mean?" Daphne asked, neutrally. The Weasleys and Hermione shared a look until the brown-haired girl nodded in resignation. She felt compelled to defend her friend, and even though she knew it would bother him that she would explain what he had seen and done, she felt it was necessary, if only to show there was some hope in this dark time. "Remember our first year?" she asked the group. "We were told to stay away from the 3rd floor corridor, which we did, but we found out someone was trying to steal something that was hidden there." "What was it?" Susan Bones asked curiously. "The Philosopher's Stone," Hermione almost whispered. "You expect us to believe that the stone was at Hogwarts?" Marietta Edgecombe asked skeptically. "It was," Hermione answered simply. "Professor Quirrell tried to steal it, and Harry stopped him," she explained. "You mean that stuttering moron who barely knew his arse from his elbow?" Lee Jordan asked. "He was possessed by you-know-who," George answered. Lee looked at his friend, but didn't question him further. The twins had a knack for knowing almost everything about Hogwarts. The room was stunned by the proclamation, and it took several moments for the silence to be broken. "How did he stop him?" Hannah Abbott asked quietly. "We don't really know," Hermione answered, "but Harry killed him and was unconscious for almost a week," after she added. "That's why you all got those last-minute points," Daphne said, suddenly in realization. "Yes, it is," Hermione replied, nodding. "And there was a second year," Ron pointed out. "What, when all those students got petrified and none of us were told what happened?" a 6th-year Hufflepuff asked. Hermione just nodded her answer, remembering the big yellow eyes of the basilisk. "Someone opened the Chamber of Secrets, and there was a basilisk inside. That's what was petrifying everyone," she explained. "So the chamber is real?" Daphne asked in awe. "Yes, the entrance is in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom," she replied. When no one spoke, not even to demonstrate their disbelief, she continued. You have to be a parcel tongue to open it, that's how Harry got in, but it wasn't him petrifying anyone, it was you-know-who again. And how did he manage that? He's dead. The same Hufflepuff boy interjected. I don't know, but he did. Hermione said irritably, How do you know that then? He questioned, equally annoyed. Because it was me that Harry saved from there, Ginny cut in, looking upset. I was taken in the chamber and Harry came in and killed the basilisk, she said, fighting back tears. That basilisk must have been hundreds of years old and huge. How did he manage that? Tracy asked, frowning. With a sword, he killed it with a sword and the help of a phoenix that blinded it, Ginny answered emotionally. You really expect us to believe that? The Hufflepuff huffed disbelievingly. Pull the other one, Weasley. He did, Ginny retorted angrily. The snake even bit him on the arm and the phoenix healed it, she added. So that's where he got that scar. Katie Bell piped up. I asked him about it, and he went quiet. I knew he didn't have it in first year, she said triumphantly. I thought he got it at home or something, she finished. At the mention of Harry's home, the teens in the know shared an awkward glance. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. George growled angrily. What's that supposed to mean? Susan Bones asked. Let's just say Harry doesn't have the life we all thought he did growing up, Fred said. He was raised by his muggle relatives, and they are nothing but bastards. They treated Harry like a damn elf and barely fed the poor kid. We had to rescue him half-starved after his first year, he finished shaking in an unusual rage. The assembled group were shocked by what they had heard, and none could find any words to say to that final piece of information. The awkward silence remained until it was broken by the pompous Hufflepuff. And what else has Potter done that is so great? He asked sarcastically, but with a little envy in his voice. Well, you all saw him in the tournament and how well he did against 7th-year students with a lot more magical education than him. Neville answered, and he can cast a corporeal patronus, Ron added. Bullshit, the Hufflepuff cut in. Most grown wizards can't even do that, he pointed out. Harry can, Hermione said quietly. I saw him drive away 100 Dementors in our 3rd year. Why would Potter have to do that? Tracy asked. Apart from that Quidditch match, they stayed away, she said. They did, but they tried to attack Harry and his godfather at the end of the year, and he drove them away, she explained kyly. Hold on, if Potter has a godfather, then why does he live with those horrible muggles? Susan asked. Hermione and the Weasleys shared a sheepish look, knowing that this was likely to be the icing on the cake for those in attendance. His godfather is Sirius Black. Hermione finally explained. If the room had been shocked before, it was nothing compared to the shock they were feeling now. Harry Potter's godfather was the infamous mass murderer. Why would Harry save him? Susan asked. He betrayed his parents, everyone knows that, she said. Sirius is innocent, George cut in. It was Peter Pettigrew who betrayed them. He's been hiding in his animagus form for years, he stated, not elaborating further. The room was completely silent once again, so Hermione took the opportunity to move the conversation away from Sirius, not wanting any more attention on that particular subject. Harry is the most powerful wizard I know. He is up there with both Dumbledore and you-know-who, but he has been quashed his whole life by his relatives. That's why he is so quiet and not very confident, but believe me, he comes through every time when it counts, she intoned. I don't know where he is or even if he is alive. But if he is, I can promise he will do everything he can to stop him. I believe Dumbledore, he has no reason to lie to us. Why do you think the Ministry has put Umbridge here, and why do you think they are trying to discredit Dumbledore? She asked. It's because they are scared of the truth. She elaborated before she could be cut off. Why do you think they want to find Harry so badly? It's because they know that he is the person everyone will look to when it all goes badly, she added. It may have been luck when he was a baby, but he isn't a baby anymore, she finished breathlessly. That's why we want to have this study group. Neville continued, we need to be ready for exams and for what's out there, because right now we would last less than a minute in any duel, he admitted. Swear on it, the Hufflepuff demanded. What do you mean, Hermione asked, the boy confused. Swear on your magic that everything you have told us is true, he demanded. Again, looking smug, without hesitating, Hermione removed her wand, but before she could say a word, she was cut off by Neville. You don't have to do that, Hermione, he said, placing his hand on her forearm. If it's the only way they believe me, then I do, she answered sadly. With that said, she raised her wand and began to speak. I, Hermione Jane Granger, swear on my life and magic that everything I have said about Harry Potter in this meeting is true to the best of my knowledge, so mote it be," she intoned without hesitation, the golden glow surrounding her. The group looked at her expectantly, waiting for something to happen to the girl. "Lumos," she incanted, lighting the tip of her wand. The group were once again shocked. They had not expected her to comply with the request the boy had made, but she had, and had been found to have been honest. The shocked group would leave today with a very different opinion of Harry Potter and what they thought they knew of the boy. Many realized that they in fact never knew a thing about him. Despite sharing a school with him for 4 years, he had always been quiet and reserved, and always kept his circle of friends small. A seed of hope had been planted within many, and all they could do was wait it out and hope that Potter would be coming back and could once again do what he had as a baby. But this time with a more permanent conclusion. "We have a piece of parchment for everyone to sign, so sign it and pass it along," Hermione said, handing the parchment to Fred. "I promise I will keep it safe, and we will let you know when the first official meeting will be, and where it is once we find a suitable place," she finished. The students signed the parchment with little hesitation, and as soon as it made its way back to Hermione, they began to disperse. After the group had left, Hermione sunk into her seat, exhausted. "That went well," Neville said. "It did," Hermione agreed. "I just wish we didn't have to explain so much about Harry," she said, feeling guilty. "They will understand," Neville replied, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "If you hadn't, they would have left and we would have been back to where we were," he added. "I know, but I still feel bad for breaking his confidence," she explained sadly. "I hope he forgives me," she said, almost to herself. "I'm sure he will," Neville answered. "Now can we please get out of here? This place is even creepier than the Shrieking Shack," he stated, with a shudder. And with that, the group exited the bar to enjoy what was left of their time away from the castle. At the end of the day, they would be going back, but they knew they had achieved something today and felt much better for it. Break. Harry had just finished his training day and was getting ready for his shower. He was both nervous and excited in his anticipation at finally getting to visit where his family were put to rest. He usually spent Halloween in quite the melancholy mood. But today was different. Today he would get to pay his respects, and to finally get some closure. He wasn't the same as he had been in previous years. In fact, his mood was one of determination. He felt more determined today than ever to give his family the overdue justice they deserved. He finished showering and took his time getting dressed. He had chosen to wear a half-buttoned khaki green shirt, a black vest, jeans, and tan boots. He didn't want it to be a formal affair. The thought of his father laughing at him, suited and booted, did not appeal to him. He caught sight of himself in the mirror and realized he needed to, at the very least, tidy up the facial hair that had quickly began to grow. He found that he liked it, and that it made him look less childlike and more distinguished. He wore it as short stubble that blended the sides of his hair that he kept equally short. He kept his hair longer on top, but just enough that he could control it with a simple, messy style. He had found a really useful barbering spell in one of his grandfather's journals, and with a little practice, he found that he was quite adept with it. He made his way to the drawing room, where Arcturus was waiting for him so they could eat before they would make their way to Godric's Hollow. He entered the room and took his seat, only to be frozen in place by a critical stare from the older man. "Go and change into a suit," he commanded simply. Harry was about to protest, but was cut off by the older man before any words could form on his lips. "It doesn't have to be a formal thing, but you will dress the part," he said firmly. "Charles would hex you something silly if he was here, and you went to visit their graves for the first time dressed like that," he pointed out. Harry swallowed and nodded before exiting. He was back in the room 10 minutes later wearing a navy blue ensemble with a plain white shirt and charcoal tie with a matching pea coat. He waited for the nod of approval from Arcturus before he took his seat. "We need to talk about tomorrow," the older man declared. "The letters were sent today, and the meeting will take place tomorrow evening," he finished. "Okay," Harry said, confused. It wasn't like the older man to divulge details of his business with the teen. "I want you to be there, but I have 2 requests," he said, noting the surprise on the teen's face. Harry just nodded in acknowledgement. "Firstly," the older man began, holding up a finger, "you'll wear your cloak and only show yourself if I give you my permission. Understood?" he asked, with a stern tone. "Yes, sir," Harry replied a little sadly, knowing he would be in the same room as his godfather and may not be able to speak to him. "And secondly," Arcturus continued, "you stay hidden no matter what happens. This is family business, and there's a chance it will become unpleasant. But unless I give you my express permission, you are to allow what will be to happen. Do you understand?" He finished questioningly, glaring at the boy. I do, sir, Harry answered sincerely. He understood the importance of family business and knew any interference from him would incur quite the wrath of the oldest Black. Good, the older man replied, relaxing once again. I think it is a good time to leave, Elgar reported. No unusual people around the graveyard, so it should hopefully go off without a hitch. He finished grabbing Harry by the arm. They appeared on a quiet street in a village where a few Victorian-style houses were dotted either side of the road. A church could be seen at the end of the road, and Harry immediately understood why his parents would choose to live here. It was simply beautiful. There was a variety of trees, and lush green hills could be seen on the horizon. There was a smell of fresh pine, and the air was thick and intoxicating. The duo made their way in a casual pace towards the church, where Harry knew the graveyard would be. Both were alert to their surroundings, as had become their custom, but they knew there was no threat. Harry could scarcely believe a tragedy such as the one 14 years ago could ever take place here. He felt a sense of familiarity with the village, and he knew that something inside him recognized it as home. They reached the entrance to the graveyard and passed through the kissing gate that led onto a gently winding path that would take them through the entirety of the cemetery if they cared to follow it. It was Charles that led Harry to where the Potters were buried. Harry hesitated and found the hand of the older man on his shoulder. He looked up to see the usual stoic expression that he could see was forced a little. You take as long as you need, the older man said sincerely before walking away, a respectable distance to allow the boys some much-needed privacy. The first grave he came to was that belonging to his grandmother. The tombstone was made of black granite adorned with the Potter crest and a beautiful gold cursive inscription. Doria Constance Potter, proud wife, mother, grandmother, healer. Born, died 12 honor thy blood. Harry knelt beside the stone and placed a hand upon it, and took a little time to simply absorb the moment. I'm sorry that we didn't get much time together, but from what I know, you would have been an amazing grandmother, he said quietly. Your brother has told me all about you. How caring and kind you were, and how you would kick my grandfather's arse when he needed it, he added, chuckling. He became thoughtful in silence, thinking of what he knew about her from what he had been told and what he had seen in the Pensieve. If I can find someone who is half the woman you are when this is all over, I know I will have done very well for myself, he whispered, placing a kiss on the granite before standing. He removed his wand and conjured a bouquet of red roses, placing it in front of her tombstone before stepping back. He moved to his left and came to the grave that was the final resting place of his grandfather. It looked very much the same as his grandmother's. It was the same black granite and gold lettering. Baron Charles Henry Potter, loving husband, father, grandfather, warrior, protector of our lands and people. Born 20, died 50, honor thy blood. Harry placed his hand on the granite, as he had with his grandmother, but remained on his feet. He became lost in his thoughts of how much the man had become an influence on him over the past months. He swallowed deeply before speaking, knowing he had to be strong. You've made me proud of who I am and where I come from, he began. I will carry the Potter name with pride and do everything in my power to be worthy of it, he added sincerely. Even in death you have taught me more than I can ever thank you for, and I cannot put into words how grateful I am. You have given me the chance to avenge my parents and make that bastard pay for what he did to you all, and he will pay. If it takes my dying breath to finish him, I promise you that I will, he said firmly. Look after them all where you are now, as you did in life, and there will be a day when I will join you, hopefully a long time from now, he finished. He again removed his wand, but this time conjured a marble figurine of a Thistero, and placed it on top of the tombstone, securing it with a permanent sticking charm. I doubt very much that you would like flowers, he laughed. But I know how much you loved her, he said, gesturing to the grave of his grandmother. I think this is much more fitting, he concluded, before moving on. He came to the grave of his father and stared at it, feeling very confused, a confusion which quickly turned to anger. The tombstone was a plain white stone with black writing. The Potter crest had been included, but the grave certainly did not represent James Potter. James Charles Potter, father to our Savior. Harry James Potter, born 11, died 30. We thank you for your sacrifice. Harry shook his head in frustration and looked towards his mother's plot that was next to his father's. It was fashioned in the same stone and writing as his father's, but there was no Potter crest. Lily Potter, mother to our Savior. Harry James Potter, born 12, died 31. We thank you for your sacrifice. Harry began to shake in rage at the disrespect shown to the memories of his parents. There was much more to them than being just his parents, but that was in no way reflected where they rested. Arcturus, feeling the fury emanating from the boy, walked to his side, and upon seeing the graves, he understood the anger Harry was feeling. Clearly the Ministry took the liberty of burying your parents, he deduced disgustedly. Harry took a deep breath to calm himself before aiming his wand at his father's tombstone. A deep look of concentration coming over him, and the stone started to transform. When he was finished, Arcturus looked impressed at what he had achieved. "You've been studying," he noticed with a little pride in his voice. "Yes, sir," Harry affirmed, not taking his eyes off his work. He even had to admit himself that he was proud of the complex transfiguration he had just demonstrated. The stone had been transfigured into granite, and the writing had changed, and was gold, reflecting the style of his grandparents. The reference to himself had been removed, and it now stood a true and proud representation of what he knew of his father. James Charles Potter. Husband, father, marauder.
May prongs run free.
Born 11, died 30. Honor thy blood. Mischief managed. I won't even ask, Arcturus said, shaking his head, stepping away, once again. It's strange, Harry began. I know more about my grandparents than I do about you, and you're my father, he continued sadly. I know we would have had a lot of fun from what Sirius has told me, and probably driven Mum insane, he said, shaking his head. You were taken too soon, he stated. He took a moment to compose himself before he continued talking. Thank you for protecting Mum and me as best as you could, he intoned sincerely. I will get the rat for what he did to us, he added confidently. I will make sure that bastard suffers for everything, he growled. I love you, Dad, and I will see you all again, he finished. He concluded his time with his father by conjuring 2 marble figurines, one of a large shaggy dog, and one of a werewolf, which he secured atop the tombstone. To add to that, he conjured a single white lily and placed it between the 2 before turning his attention to the grave of his mother. He looked at it distastefully and quickly went to work, transfiguring it in a more suitable monument to his mother. When he was finished, it reflected the other 3, and the Potter crest adorned it proudly. Lily Potter, loving mother and wife, undoubtedly the brightest witch of her age. Born died 30. Honor thy blood. I spent my whole life wishing you were here, and being tormented by your final moments, he said sadly. Hearing your voice after what happened in June has taken most of that away. I'm not going to apologize for all the things I will have to do, because I know you understand and will forgive me, he spoke quietly. Before he could stop it, a tear broke free from his eye, and he made no attempt to wipe it away. There's still not a day that goes by where I wouldn't give everything I own just to have you back for a minute, he said shakily. I love you, Mum, and thank you for what you did for me. I promise I won't let it be in vain, he ended, wiping away the errant tear. He conjured a marble figure of a stag and one of a lily and fixed them to the stone. He took one last look at the area in which his family had been laid to rest, and made his way to Arcturus, who nodded before making his own way to the graves. When he had finished having his private moments, he conjured 4 black roses and placed one on each tombstone. Harry was touched by the sentiment of the older man, but knew he wouldn't appreciate him vocalizing it. Instead, he gave him a grateful nod as he returned. The older man returned, the nod before disappearing with a soft pop. Harry took one last look around him and one final glance at the graves of his family. I'll be back soon, he whispered quietly. With that, he himself disappeared with a near inaudible crack. Harry appeared in the drawing room, but did not take a seat. He felt the need to be alone and reflect back on the past hour of his life. To him, it was one of those defining moments in a lifetime, and he knew now that he would never be the same. His determination had become even more firm, despite the fact he felt that that had not been possible. Thank you, sir, he said monotonously. He exited and made his way to his room, knowing he wouldn't sleep anytime soon. But instead of working, he laid awake for hours, just thinking of his family and truly taking in the experience of the night. It had been bittersweet, but he knew it could not have been any other way. He eventually fell into an easy sleep that night, the best sleep he had ever had in his short 15 years of life. Break. Andromeda Tonks was not looking forward to the meeting she had been requested to attend with her husband and daughter. The Tonks family had spent the entirety of the previous day discussing all possibilities and outcomes and had put in place a contingency plan for if they needed to flee. They were all hoping that whatever the issue was, that it could be dealt with in a way that their lives wouldn't have to change. Ted Tonks was the most nervous of the trio. He had never had anything to do with the Blacks, being a Muggle-born. He simply would not have been worthy of their time. He was aware of their reputation, of course, and always wondered if his wife had truly come from the family. There was no doubt, of course, that she had. It wasn't only the uncanny resemblance to her sister that confirmed it, but he had seen and been on the receiving end of her temper. If truth be told, he was terrified of his wife when she was angry. She was very powerful, and the fact that she was a black could not be ignored in her moments of fury. These moments were very rare, however. She was a very loving and caring woman, but would defend himself and their daughter to the very end, if necessary. This thought made the impending meeting rest a little easier with the man. It wasn't that he feared the blacks. He was a very capable wizard in his own right, but he feared what this meeting would mean for his family. All he could do was wait and see and just hope that whatever happened, they could handle between them. Nymphadora Tonks was feeling confused more than any other emotion. She had never been exposed to her mother's family, so didn't truly understand the severity of the situation. The black family had essentially been non-existent throughout her life, and she only remembered Sirius from when she was a child, and he was always nice. Whatever would happen, she would not allow anyone to take control of her life in any way. She would do as her mother did and flee if necessary before that would happen. Although she was confident that whatever it was could be fixed, she couldn't help the twinge of nervousness that would appear every so often at the thought of the meeting. Break. Sirius Black woke the next morning. Nothing less than a bag of nerves, wondering what the day to come would entail. He knew that things were going to be different after today, one way or the other, but he couldn't decide if that would be a good thing or not. On the one hand, he was safe where he was and how things were. He was out of the direct line of fire, and he knew there was no one who could get into his house without his say. So his family had at least done a good job warding Grimmauld Place, and for that he could be grateful. On the other hand, he felt that he was merely sat on the sidelines, just waiting and watching as things progressed around him. Sirius was a man of action and would much rather be in the thick of it than sat doing what he deemed as nothing. Yes, he knew that things would be changing for better or worse, and all he could do was wait and see what the outcome of the day would be and hope that the changes would be positive for him. He spent his day pacing and watching the clock, urging the time to either pass quickly in his braver moments or begging it to slow when the nerves got the better of him, before he could decide completely on how he wanted the time to pass. It was time to activate the port key to the bank. It would be left to whatever deity was watching over him to decide his fate. A notion that did not sit well with the man. Break. Harry and Arcturus were in the meeting room at Gringotts waiting for their guests to arrive. Harry, as promised, was sat in the corner of the room, concealed by his invisibility cloak, and despite the fact he knew he would not be able to talk to Sirius unless the older man said it was okay, though he was excited at the prospect of seeing his godfather. Arcturus was sat at the head of the large oak table that had been provided for the gathering, and Barchoke was stood at the door waiting to greet the black family members as they arrived. The two had had a conversation in which the goblin was told to not involve himself and allow what was to happen as Harry had been instructed. The goblin readily agreed, not wanting to be included in the meeting, knowing the reputation of the family. Not long had passed when they heard the arrival of a port key outside the door, and all the occupants of the room knew who it was. At the tentative knock of the door, the goblin opened it to greet Sirius. "Mr. Black, please come in and take a seat," the goblin requested in his business tone. "Thank you, boss." Sirius froze at the sight of his long-thought-to-be-dead grandfather and paled considerably. He seemed to find himself quickly, though, and yelped in shock before turning to sprint out of the still-open door he had just come through. "Get your worthless hide back here, you mangy cur," Arcturus roared, hurling a stinging hex at his retreating grandson's rear end. Harry heard his godfather yelp as the spell hit its mark, followed by a thud as the man hit the floor. He couldn't help himself and had to stifle a snigger as the man reappeared, rubbing his behind and gaping like a fish out of water. "Will you stop stuttering? You look even more of a moron," the older man demanded exasperatedly. "But you're dead," Sirius said dumbly, pointing at his grandfather with a disbelieving finger. "The fuck I am," Arcturus replied, clearly irritated. "I'm sat right here, and even a buffoon like you can see that. Now sit down for fuck's sake before I fly you alive, you simpleton," he commanded, pointing at a chair to his left. The younger man complied, knowing that it was not an empty threat. He sat, staring at his grandfather dumbly, and realized that this was going to be much worse than he anticipated. Now the shit really was going to hit the fan. "Are you going to hand me over to him?" Sirius finally managed to ask, discreetly withdrawing his wand from his sleeve under the table. "If I wanted you dead, I'd do it myself. I don't need the help of a half-blooded bastard to help Minda with that." Arcturus spat. "And I'd put that wand back where you took it from, before you find it rammed up your arse," he added, glaring at the younger man. Sirius just swallowed deeply, partly out of relief, and partly from the nervousness that had settled in. It was then that he realized what the older man had said, and found himself confused. "What do you mean, half-blooded bastard?" he asked in his confusion. "Ah, so Dumbledore is still his secretive self, I see, and hasn't seen fit to tell you what you're up against. That's another moron I'll be having a conversation with," he said quietly to himself. "What are you talking about?" Sirius asked, getting annoyed. "We will get to the hows and whys later. We have things to discuss before everyone else arrives, and use that tone with me again. You filthy mutt, and I'll make sure you're neutered in both forms. Understand?" Arcturus questioned severely. Sirius looked shocked and began jabbering again. He finally managed to speak, but his voice had definitely climbed an octave or two higher. "You know," he questioned flatly. "Of course I know. You always smelt like dog. Either that or you have disgusting inclinations towards them. Is that what it is? You like to lay with animals?" he questioned. "Then again, going by some of the witches you've been known to cavort with, it wouldn't surprise me." The old man grimaced. Sirius yelped in indignation and began sputtering incoherently. Before he could formulate words again, Arcturus cut him off. "We will get to your love life a little later," he said seriously, "but now we have other things to discuss." With speed the younger man wasn't expecting, Arcturus had him by the throat and had slammed his head on the table. Upon seeing this, Harry had to fight the urge to intervene. What had seemed initially amusing to him was now becoming clear that this situation was anything but. Arcturus looked into the fear-filled eyes of his grandson before he began to question him. He just hoped that he was not about to be lied to. The younger man would do well, to be honest. The consequences would not be pleasant. "Did you do it?" he hissed at his grandson. "Did you sell out the Potters to that bastard?" he questioned. It wasn't the fact that he believed Sirius to be guilty, but he wanted to hear it from the man himself. He wanted to look him in the eyes and see the truth there. Arcturus was not a man who would listen to rumors or the testimony of others. He had to be sure for himself. Sirius was furious at the question. His grandfather knew how close he was to James and Lily, and knew that he would not have done it. "I would have died first," Sirius spat, with venom in his voice. Arcturus knew the boy was telling the truth and simply nodded. Seeing the anger in his eyes gave him hope that he had found a true ally for the Potter boy. Hell, he couldn't fight this war alone. "Good," the older man said, releasing his grandson and returning to his seat. He watched Sirius rubbing his neck and gave him a moment to compose himself before he continued. "Apart from myself, you are the last remaining black male, and when I die, you will take over the family," he stated to the surprised younger man. "What do you plan on doing to continue the family line?" he asked. Sirius looked more than a little embarrassed and rubbed the back of his neck nervously, clearly unwilling to answer. Eventually, he blew out a long breath and hung his head in what seemed to be shame. 12 years in Azkaban takes away certain capabilities," he explained quietly. "The wand can fire spells, but there's no magic in them," he finished in a whisper. Arcturus had suspected as much, but did not want to discuss the potency of his grandson's seed with him. "You have a contingency plan, I assume," he stated neutrally. "I made a will 15 years ago that leaves everything I own to my godson," he answered, expecting to be reprimanded again, "and I'd sooner see our family end and outfortune become nothing than hand it over to the Malfoys," he spat distastefully. Harry was surprised by the fact Sirius had left him everything and actually felt like he mattered to someone for the first time in his life. It wasn't the possessions that made him grateful, but the sentiment the man had shown. He couldn't believe that he would mean so much to the man. Arcturus just nodded at the answer his grandson had given him. He couldn't agree more with the man, but was certainly not going to let him know that. Before he could question him further, he was interrupted by the man himself. "Why are you back now? Why would you want everyone to think you were dead?" Sirius asked sincerely. "A few months before the Dark Lord fell, your brother came to see me," he stated. At the mention of his brother, Sirius shot to his feet, shaking instantly in rage. "That bastard was a Death Eater," he growled in fury. "Your brother has done more to end this fucking war than anyone. If it wasn't for him, the wizarding world would be fucked," the older man said dangerously. "Barchok, can I use your pensieve?" he asked. The goblin, knowing his grandson would not believe him until he saw for the memory for himself. "Of course, Baron Black," the goblin agreed and summoned a stone bowl to place on the table. Arcturus carefully withdrew the memory he wanted and placed it in the bowl and gestured for his grandson to enter. It was a few minutes later that Sirius emerged looking both pale and emotional and fell into his seat in a stupor. He turned against him, he stated lamely. He did, the older man agreed. Sirius frowned and looked towards his grandfather. He could not understand why he was being like this and why any of this mattered to the man. Why do you care? He asked, not taking his eyes off of him. Arcturus was not surprised by the question and had expected it. He thought before he answered, but would not hide the truth from the boy. He was family, after all. Something the older man had little left of. The First and Second War tore my family, our family, to pieces, he began. Our family will not survive another war unless we come together. I've spent my whole life trying to rebuild the Black family. And before this bastard came along, the first time we were doing well, he paused before he continued. Not only that, he killed my best friend, he said sadly. No, not my friend, he added, shaking his head. My brother, he finished. Uncle Charles Sirius said quietly. But why come back now? He asked again. I haven't been sat on my thumb these last 14 years, he grumbled irritably. You saw the memory and what he mentioned, he said. Horcruxes. What the hell are they? Sirius asked. It doesn't matter, I am dealing with them, the older man explained, cutting Sirius off. Just leave it to me, he added sternly. So you're on Dumbledore's side. Sirius choked in realization, pointing at the older man in amusement. I am on my side, the older man corrected. Dumbledore is too soft to lead anyone in a war. How can you follow someone who would have you stun your enemies and lock them up only for them to be released again? He asked. Dumbledore will get us all killed and condemn me for fighting the way a war is supposed to be fought, he finished. But Dumbledore killed Grindelwald. Sirius pointed out. No, Arcturus interrupted. Grindelwald killed himself. He was hit by his own spell, and even I'm sure that Dumbledore did that by accident, he hazarded. Sirius just sat listening to what his grandfather had said and knew it was true. Dumbledore would insist on non-lethal spells that the Death Eaters certainly would not be using. Before the conversation could go any further, there was another knock on the door, and the two men took their seats and waited for their guest to be admitted. Sirius was confused, but figured that the people who would be attending could only be members of the Black family. He was surprised, however, to see the Tonks family enter the room, having expected it to be one of his distant aunts. Oh, shit, Andromeda cried when she caught sight of her grandfather. She then looked questioningly at Sirius, who shook his head and shrugged. The youngest member of the Tonks family was simply confused at the fear she could see in her mother's eyes, and even more confused at the presence of her cousin. Sirius, Dumbledore is going to go spare when he finds out you left the house, she hissed urgently. Dumbledore can get fucked, Arcturus cut in. Now take a seat, he commanded to the trio, who were still stood. All three complied, Andromeda knowing that her grandfather was not to be disobeyed, and the other two simply following her lead. Andromeda, the older man began. It has been a while, he finished frowning. 25 years, the woman replied with anger, evident in her voice. 25 years ago, I was cast out because I refused to marry Evan Rosier. She spat disdainfully. Cast out? Arcturus asked sarcastically. You left of your own accord, he stated. Andromeda just stared at her grandfather in confusion, but couldn't find a point to argue. She had left of her own free will, but knew she would no longer be welcome or even considered a Black because of her choice of husband. Before she could make her point, the older man cut in again. You were never cast out, Andromeda. Your father never had the authority, and when he came to me to have you removed, I refused him, he explained. The same with your hag of a mother, he added, looking at Sirius. The two could only stare at the older man in shock. They had never officially been cast out of the family. Neither could find the words to express what they felt. Confusion, anger, and annoyance mostly. They were saved the effort by Arcturus addressing Ted. You must be Theodore, he acknowledged the man distastefully. Yes, sir, Ted answered nervously. To you it is either Lord Black or Baron Black. Understood? He asked, glaring at the man. Ted swallowed deeply, but nodded. Yes, Lord Black, he managed to stammer. Nymphadora Tonks was confused as to why her mother would allow this man to talk to her father this way. She was angry and was about to give the man a piece of her mind when she was cut off by her mother. Be quiet, Nymphadora, she advised quietly, shaking her head vigorously. Ah. And you must be the daughter, Arcturus intoned, turning his attention to the young woman and looking at her appearance distastefully. An Oro and Metamorph, a talent inherited from the black line, he added. The Ore just nodded at the older man's observation. Why is it that you use the gift so liberally? He asked. It would be much smarter for you to choose one form for day-to-day use and only use the gift when you need it and not in such a fashion, he suggested, gesturing to her an ample bosom. I like to be different and change things, she answered, shrugging. No, the older man said, shaking his head. You like to stand out the way you do because you think it gives you your own identity, he said, his gray, steely eyes boring into her bright blue ones. You think that someone would only want you for your ability to change your body, and you've accepted that, he added. Have some self-respect for fuck's sake and stop trying to please people who don't matter, because I know you look nothing like this in your natural state, he finished, gesturing to the woman who was looking shocked and upset at how accurate this stranger was. Why are we here? Andromeda cut in, noting how upset her daughter was becoming. We are here because we are the last of the Blacks, and we have to discuss how we plan on surviving the coming war. Arcturus began taking his seat once again. In the past, I have allowed the family to have too much freedom and free reign on what they do, but that stops now, he informed them firmly. I will not become one of that mad bastard's followers, the youngest Tonks growled. Good, the older man said, surprising the trio. Let me explain why I am here and what I have been doing these last 14 years, he added to the confused threesome. He then went on to explain the decimation of the Black family because of the rises of Voldemort and Grindelwald. He explained that Regulus had come to him and gave him certain information and that he had turned on his master. He did not mention the Horcruxes as he had to Sirius, not wanting any more people to know. He explained how much he knew the wizarding world would change and how being a Black would become meaningless if the remaining family members survived, something he did not want to see happen after all of his hard work to re-establish the name as something significant. When he was finished, the trio were both shocked and flabbergasted. But they were not able to question the man further, as there was another knock on the door that had the four guests looking confused and tense. When the door opened and Narcissa Malfoy entered, the atmosphere became very tense. Even Harry felt himself stiffen at her presence, not being aware that she would be here. The first thing Narcissa saw was four wands pointed at her, but before she could reach for her own, she caught sight of her grandfather and paled from shock, but mostly fear. This was not good for her at all. Sit down, Narcissa, the older man commanded in a sour tone. Narcissa flattened her robes and took a seat next to the man alone on one side of the table, who she then realized was her cousin Sirius. She quickly hid her surprise behind an impassive mask before addressing him. Cousin Sirius, she greeted him formally. You are looking well for a man on the run, she observed with a raised eyebrow. Narcissa Sirius, in tone sounding bored. You look thin and quite unwell, he said, lazily and uninterested. Narcissa chose not to dignify her cousin with a response, but instead turned her attention to the other three people sat on the opposite side of the table. This time, she could not conceal her surprise so well. And as she greeted, inclining her head towards the older sister, it's been a while, she finished. Sissy Andromeda replied, using her childhood nickname for her sister. Narcissa chose to ignore the other two members of the Tonks family and instead addressed her grandfather. Why were Lucius and Draco not invited, she asked. Surely if they, she said distastefully, indicating the Tonks family, are here, then my son and husband should be also, she concluded. Your son and husband could not be any less of a Black if they tried. Arcturus replied sourly. My husband is a good man, she retorted, and Draco will one day be the head of this family. She pointed out, your husband is a moron, and your son is exactly the same. Arcturus answered angrily, and I will be damned if I let the head of this family be a Malfoy, he spat. Before Narcissa could reply, she was cut off by her grandfather. Lucius is nothing but a brown-nosing piss stain who should never have been allowed to marry into our family. He is not worthy, and the offspring you have brought into this world is not worthy of such a title. I would sooner see everything we own burnt to the ground before it goes to those fucking imbeciles, he concluded firmly. Narcissa was shocked in this silence. She had not expected this, nor had she expected to hear her family spoken of in such a way. She knew things were not going to end well for her here, but remained quiet and waited to see how this would play out. Before we continue, Arcturus interrupted her thoughts. You will all give a magical oath on both your life and magic that nothing you have seen or heard or will see and hear will be spoken of to anyone not in this room, he instructed. And if we refuse, Narcissa asked, panicked and angry, then I will obliviate you until you are nothing more than a dribbling mess, he answered sincerely. That includes revealing in any way that I am alive, he added, seeing Narcissa, thinking quickly. All of the occupants of the table shared a look, and Sirius was the first to give his oath, followed by the two older Tonks. Nymphadora hesitated, and before she could give her oath, Arcturus interrupted. That also means you can't tell Dumbledore, he explained gravely. Tonks just nodded before giving her oath, and the group turned their attention to Narcissa, who was clearly hesitant. Why am I here? She asked. All you've done is insult my family and essentially cast them out, she finished nervously. You are here because you are family, Arcturus pointed out simply. I know you are loyal to that idiot husband of yours, but I am giving you the chance to put a contingency plan in place, and if you decide you want out, then you will have the opportunity, he explained further. What about Draco? She asked in reply. Your son is a Malfoy and will follow his moronic father. I give it less than a year before he takes that ridiculous mark, the older man estimated confidently. Narcissa looked upset, but knew it was likely. She would not turn her back on her husband, though. Despite his flaws, she loved him and her son more than anything. Reluctantly, she gave the same vow that the rest of the family had given and sighed in frustration. I can't go against him, she proclaimed, stubbornly. I didn't expect anything less, Arcturus replied, shrugging, but now I can rest easy, knowing I gave you fair warning. The rest is in your hands, he finished. You mean to stand against the Dark Lord? Narcissa whispered in shock and realization. I do, Arcturus said simply, but he will kill you all. None of you can defeat him, she pointed out. Then we will die trying, the younger Tonks interjected firmly. Then you are all fools, Narcissa deadpanned. She sat for a moment and pondered the situation. There was no one alive who could stand against the Dark Lord and win. It was then she thought she realized what was happening, and she couldn't hold back her laughter. You are siding with Dumbledore, she stated. You think Dumbledore can finish the Dark Lord? She gasped disbelievingly. Arcturus shook his head and smirked at his granddaughter. Dumbledore can probably barely finish his dinner these days, he stated. And no, I am not siding with him, he added coyly. Then who? Narcissa asked. There is no one else who can stand against him and win. The only other person who people foolishly believed in was the Potter boy, and he's dead. Lucius saw it himself, she pointed out. Arcturus just laughed at her confusion. He had been waiting for this moment for days now, knowing it would come to this. He edged his face closer to his granddaughter and smirked again. Dead is he asked. Why don't you see for yourself how very much alive he is? He finished smugly. All the table turned to see Harry Potter appear at the other side of the room. But this was not a Harry that Sirius nor Narcissa remembered. He no longer looked like a meek and vulnerable young boy. The person that stood in front of them now was nothing short of being a man. He was 6 foot tall, athletically built, with much shorter hair and stubble. He was minus his trademark glasses and scar, and he was wearing a plain black t-shirt that fit him like a second skin, a pair of dark blue jeans and honey-colored boots. Sirius stood slowly, hardly believing his eyes. He had been waiting for this moment for months, and the confusion he should have been feeling was not registering. All he knew was that Harry was stood in front of him, and he could now protect his godson. Before Harry could say anything, his godfather had cleared the room in the blink of an eye and was now clinging to him and sobbing uncontrollably into his shoulder. Wanting the awkward moment to end, Harry pushed the man away gently before addressing, For fuck's sake, not here, Sirius. Pull yourself together, he hissed. The other man, not having heard what his godson had said, started to ramble, which turned into quick talking as he vocalized a plan. We can get you away from here, pup, and I will keep you safe, I promise. We can find somewhere to sit this war out, he finished sincerely. Harry looked at his godfather and found he appreciated what the man was trying to do, but shook his head all the same. I'm not going anywhere, Sirius. I'm not running from him, he stated firmly in a no-nonsense tone. But you're too young to have to do this, Harry. He will kill you, Sirius pleaded. He might, Harry agreed. But I'll be taking that bastard with me, he finished vehemently. Sirius turned to his grandfather, his face a mask of fury. What the fuck have you done to him? He asked, furiously. I healed him and gave him the tools. The rest is his own work. The older man shrugged with a glare. But he is just a boy. Surely you're not serious. Andromeda cut in. Arcturus looked annoyed, but he knew he needed to make them understand why he was doing this. He looked at each person assembled and came up with an idea. How many of you have faced him? He asked. None of them, apart from Harry, raised their hands. How many times have you faced him, Potter? He questioned. 4 times so far, he answered. 4? Sirius asked as the rest of the room looked confused. When I was a baby, first year, second year, and in the graveyard, he replied casually. Everyone in the room looked even more confused. Arcturus just nodded and turned to address the rest of the group. Say his name, he commanded to them all. None of them replied, and they looked nervous. Potter, he commanded. Voldemort, Harry said without hesitation, causing the rest of the group to flinch or shudder. None of you have faced him or dare even speak his name, and yet you think Potter shouldn't, he said, glaring at his family. But he is just a boy, Andromeda reiterated. Arcturus continued glaring at the assembled group before he nodded and proceeded with his plan. He knew it would be the only way. Fine, he began. If all you see is a boy, then prove it. One of you duel him, I don't care who, and if you win, I will agree with Sirius that Potter should sit the war out and you can take him wherever you want to go, he bargained. Before the group could even discuss the matter, the youngest Tonks stepped forward. I'll do it, she declared. I owe him 1 from July, she said with a little embarrassment. So you were Dumbledore's lackey who attacked me, Miss Tonks? Harry asked, a little surprised. You look better with pink hair, he added to the amusement of Sirius and the embarrassment of the Auror. You won't be making jokes soon, Potter, she retorted angrily through gritted teeth, making her way to the other side of the room. Arcturus looked towards the goblin who just shrugged and waved his hand, causing the table to disappear. All of those not taking part stand behind this line, he said as he waved his hand again, and a blue line appeared. Arcturus grabbed Harry by the arm and spoke to him quietly so no other could hear. I meant what I said, Potter, he growled. If you lose, then you go with him, he added, nodding towards Sirius. Don't fuck around and don't hold back. Show them why you're here, he instructed firmly. Harry just nodded at the older man. He did not want to hurt the young woman, but he would be damned if he would be sitting this war out. This was his proving ground, and he realized he had a lot to prove to the people assembled and to himself. He steeled himself and took his place opposite the blue-haired Auror. Begin when you're ready, Arcturus said casually with a shrug. Tonks wasted no time and began to fire all kinds of spells at Potter's stunners, disarming charms, and even a few bludgeoning hexes. Harry, to the annoyance of his opponent, simply batted them away lazily as if they were nothing. The Aurora growled in frustration and began firing spells that had much less friendly intentions. She fired bone breakers and concussion spells with vigor and a speed that most would struggle with. Harry avoided the spells with a greater speed and grace that none in the room thought possible, and he made it look easy. They were in awe at the 15-year-old's ability, and he had yet to even fire a spell. Harry was becoming very annoyed. The Order was not dueling to just incapacitate, she was dueling to cause him injury. He saw a bone breaker coming towards him, but did not move or shield. He waited. The spectators cringed at the impending impact, knowing it was going to be very unpleasant. They were again surprised as the Potter simply raised his wand and the spell stopped just in front of it and formed into a ball. He then hissed at it and the spell turned from a dark blue to a bright pink, which he launched back at the woman with incredible speed and power, sending her flying through the air and into the wall, knocking her unconscious. The people watching were all stunned at what they had just seen apart from Andromeda, who ran to the unconscious form of her daughter to try and rouse her. What the hell was that, Potter? Arcturus asked with a little awe in his voice. That should not be possible, he stated. Something I've been working on. Harry shrugged casually. Though I haven't tried it with anything stronger than a stunner, he added, rubbing the back of his neck. How? Sirius asked quietly. It's the same as batting the spell away, but you block and manipulate the magic to capture the spell, he explained. The second part is a parcel tongue modification spell that's usually used for healing charms, he continued. It usually modifies a bone knitting charm into a skin sealing charm without having to end the spell, he explained further. I found it works with combat magic and can turn a stunner into pretty much what I want, but it doesn't work unless it is done in parcel tongue, he finished. That is quite something. Arcturus intoned, You're a Parselmouth? Ted asked nervously. Yes, it's something I inherited from my black heritage, Harry answered the apprehensive man. Narcissa just looked on in shock at the younger man, but said nothing. She was admittedly impressed, but this was just a friendly duel. She was not convinced by the boy. She won't wake, Andromeda called worriedly from across the room. "It's okay, Mrs. Tonks," Harry said, walking towards the duo. "I only turned it into a stunning spell. You might not be strong enough to counter it," he explained, leaning over the Auror. "Innervate," he mumbled, pointing his wand at the woman. Nymphadora Tonks woke to the brightest green eyes she had ever seen. They were alight with power, and there seemed to be gently flickering emerald flames within them that shone in the dim light. There was something else there that didn't seem to fit the power she saw. There was concern in them. She flushed a gentle pink, and her hair turned involuntarily red at the beauty she saw in those orbs. Before she could compose herself or speak, she heard the voice belonging to those eyes, and she remembered where she was. "My apologies, Miss Tonks," Harry said sincerely. "I didn't expect it to be so powerful." He finished offering his hand to help her to her feet. Tonks took the offered hand and allowed herself to be pulled to her feet by the surprisingly gentle grip of the young man. "Ouch," she gasped suddenly, rubbing her chest. "Why is it always the chest with you, Potter?" she said, frowning. Harry just raised an eyebrow at her and pointed his wand at her chest, hissing a spell that made the pain dissipate immediately. "You do make him quite the target," Harry retorted, eliciting another flush from the Aura, who tried to control it but failed miserably. She was not used to being made to feel this way. It was her who usually embarrassed other people and made them flush. She crossed her arms and huffed, scowling at Harry, who just let a snort of laughter pass and shook his head at her antics. Andromeda turned to her grandfather and addressed the man, still surprised by all she had seen. "Why couldn't I wake her?" she asked, confused. "The boy is a lot more powerful than you," Arcturus answered matter-of-factly. "But he is 15, she said, exasperatedly. "And he has already been through his magical maturity," the older man explained. Already Sirius cut in, sounding concerned. "But that shouldn't happen for at least a few more years," he pointed out. "He is hardly the average wizard, is he?" Arcturus asked rhetorically. "How long did it last?" Andromeda asked. "Potter," Arcturus called, garnering the boy's attention. "How long did your maturity last?" he asked. 11 days, Harry answered, shrugging. 11, Sirius yelped. "Mine was only 5, and James's was 6, he said despondently. "Mine was 5, Andromeda added in awe. 5 for me too, Ted chimed in. "Nymphadora's was 6, I think," Andromeda said quietly. "How powerful is he?" "Powerful enough to drive away 100 Dementors," Sirius said in realization. When he was 13, he added. Andromeda scoffed. "A 13-year-old producing a corporeal Patronus is one thing, but driving off that many Dementors too," she asked. "He saved my life doing it," Sirius said quietly. "I don't believe it," Andromeda said, shaking her head. "It's just not possible," she finished. Harry Sirius called, still quietly. "Can you show us prongs?" he asked. Harry looked a little nervous and sheepish before he answered his godfather. He didn't want to disappoint the man, but he couldn't give him what he wanted. "It's not prongs anymore," Harry whispered. "What do you mean?" Sirius questioned worriedly. "It's changed now, and it's a she," he said, looking at Arcturus, who nodded in recognition. "Can I see?" Sirius asked. Harry swallowed but nodded, and thought of the picture currently sat on his bedside table. "Expecto Patronum," he whispered, and his now familiar Thestral appeared in a burst of the brightest white light and a heat that warmed the entire room. "Incredible," Andromeda said in awe, reaching out to touch the creature. "You can actually touch her," she added, just above a whisper. The Strahl," Sirius said in surprise with a frown, which quickly changed to raised eyebrows that almost disappeared into his hairline. "Antoria?" he asked Arcturus, who nodded solemnly. The boy knew nothing of his family at all. He spat bitterly. "But I told him all about his grandparents. It's up to you to tell him about his parents," he informed Sirius. Sirius nodded, knowing it is something he owed Harry and himself. He had barely spoken about James and Lily for 15 years, and there was no one he would rather discuss them with than his godson. "Your wand," Sirius suddenly said loudly to Harry. "It was broken, and Dumbledore has the pieces," he added. "What is that?" he asked, looking at the wand, still in Harry's hand. The rest of the room turned their attention to the mentioned wand, and looked at it in confusion. "What is it made of?" Andromeda asked, eyeing the implement curiously. Harry looked at Arcturus, who glared at everyone in the room, staring at the boy's wand. A wand was a personal thing and not something that should be asked about, regardless of how curious it appears. You don't have to answer, Arcturus told him firmly, still glaring at the gathered people. It's okay, Harry said. They can't use it anyway, he added in amusement. The outer is made of white ash infused with obsidian, he began. That's a black trait, Sirius interrupted. But it should be a focus stone, and combining those two like that must be very difficult, he surmised, looking confused. The guy couldn't do it that way, Harry said. The cores are contradictory, so one of them had to be put inside the obsidian like that, so it could bond with the rest of the cores and would, he explained what he had been told by the wand maker. What are your cores? Andromeda asked curiously, knowing it was going to be far from a normal combination. Hungarian Horntail, Heartstring, and Golden Gryffindor, Harry said, and was interrupted again, this time Ted Tonks, who whistled. That's quite a combination, he said, impressed, but was cut off by the teen again. Phoenix Tears and Basilisk Venom. Finished quietly. Basilisk Venom and Phoenix Tears? Andromeda asked, clearly surprised. Having an affinity for one is completely unheard, even, but both, she finished shaking her head. I have them both in my blood, Harry explained. You'd be dead if you had basilisk venom in your blood, Narcissa cut in skeptically. Second year, Harry said darkly, I got bitten by the snake, Fawkes healed it, and I killed the basilisk with a sword, he added, staring at the woman. All courtesy of your husband who decided to plant an artifact belonging to Voldemort on an 11-year-old girl, he spat through gritted teeth at the woman. Andromeda and Ted looked from Narcissa to Arcturus, who nodded. I've seen the memory, he confirmed. However, we are here to discuss what we are going to do next, he said, steering the conversation back to the business at hand. There's not much I can do, Sirius said, frustrated. I'm a wanted man, he finished. Then we need to find the rat. Harry cut in with disgust. That is your next project. Potter Arcturus decided. Bring in the rat, he added. Harry couldn't help but feel excited by the prospect of getting hold of Pettigrew. The rat would not get away this time if he had any say in the matter. Harry nodded at the older man and smirked at the opportunity. Do not kill him, for fuck's sake, Potter. Arcturus commanded upon seeing the look. If not, this idiot will spend the rest of his life on the run, he concluded sternly, gesturing towards Sirius. Kill, the youngest Tonks piped up. You don't expect him to kill, really, do you? She asked, getting a nod of agreement from Sirius and Ted. This is war, Arcturus spat. You kill or be killed. What, you plan on stunning everyone? He asked sarcastically. Because these bastards won't be firing stunners. I can promise you that, he ground out. Dumbledore won't like that, Tonks pointed out nervously. Tough shit, Arcturus spat. I am not Dumbledore, and Dumbledore is not fucking in charge of anyone who opposes these bastards. If you listen to him, you will die, he finished exasperatedly. You're all insane, Narcissa whispered quietly. He is going to kill you all. You don't stand a chance, she added, shaking her head. Before anyone could say a word, Harry stormed over to the woman, finally having enough of her presence and her attitude. Everyone felt the temperature of the room drop considerably as the teen made his way to her and shuddered at the power they could feel radiating from him. Harry looked at her in the eyes with a penetrating stare and saw her pale at his towering figure. I am going to kill the bastard and any of the fucking morons who bear his mark. He spoke dangerously with conviction. That includes your prick of a husband and your idiot son if he joins him. He added, Do you want to know the type of man your husband is? He asked rhetorically. Narcissa simply could not answer, and she was frozen with fear. She could feel her body shaking and lip trembling at how intimidated she was. She had only ever felt this kind of fear in the presence of the Dark Lord, and she did not like it. She believed every word the boy was saying. She could see the sincerity in the emerald fire-filled eyes of him. She swallowed deeply and waited for him to continue, hoping he would let her leave. He knew she could not breathe a word to anyone, and she just hoped he would remember that. Your husband and his friends watched and taunted a 14-year-old as he was tortured over and over again by that cunt, he spat. They laughed and spurred him on, seeing it as entertainment, he added quietly. And believe me, I will tear them all limb from limb and piss on whatever is left, he finished through gritted teeth. Narcissa was horrified at how feral the young man looked and knew he meant every word he was saying. Before she could even fathom replying, the cold look left the boy's face and he looked his normal self. But don't worry, Mrs. Malfoy, Harry added casually. I will make sure you get whatever remains of your husband, he warned in what seemed a joyful and condescending tone. That only the woman in front of him detected the promise within. Now get out, he commanded, once again reverting back to his cold tone. Narcissa spared only a small glance at her family before exiting the room as quickly as possible, watched the entire time by the Potter boy. Harry just curled his lip in distaste at the woman before turning to look at the other occupants of the room, who all had fearful looks on their faces. Damn, Harry, Sirius finally managed to utter, "You're terrifying," he added, getting nods of agreement from the Tonks family. "I meant every word," Harry replied quietly. Arcturus looked at the young man, appraisingly, and had no doubt about the boy's ability and intentions. He was silently impressed, and couldn't be prouder of him. Just like Charles, he thought to himself, nodding slightly. "Where do we go from here?" Andromeda asked everyone in the room. "Potter will get the rat," Arcturus reaffirmed, indicating Harry, who just nodded. "You and your husband keep your eyes and ears open and start preparing a case for this moron," he added, gesturing to Sirius. "And you two," he said, pointing at Tonks and his grandson. "I want to know what Dumbledore knows. He may be an old fool, but he knows more than he lets on," he concluded. "He doesn't tell us much," Sirius answered, "but he has members of the Order guarding something in the Department of Mysteries," he explained. "Does he?" Arcturus questioned, scratching his chin. "Something he's after?" he asked. Sirius and Tonks could only nod, not being sure what exactly was being guarded. "Find out what it is. It is obviously important," he commanded. "Anything else?" he asked. "How is the funeral?" Harry asked quietly to Tonks and Sirius, who looked confused. "What funeral?" Sirius asked, looking at Tonks, who shrugged. "Hagrid's," Harry answered, frustrated. "Don't tell me no one knows," he finished agitatedly. "Know what?" Sirius asked, equally frustrated. "About the giants," Harry sighed exasperatedly. "We saw them, about 20 of them, and they had killed Hagrid and Maxime," he explained to the duo. "Hagrid's dead?" Sirius asked dumbly. "But Dumbledore would have told us that," he mumbled quietly, looking sad. "He obviously doesn't know," Harry huffed in realization. "You have to tell him. He and Hagrid were good friends," he finished sadly, thinking of the half-giant. "Oh, Pup," Sirius said, swallowing. "I'm sorry, I knew you were close to him," he added sincerely. "It happens," Harry replied, shrugging. "It will happen a lot more before this is done with," he concluded. "What should we tell Dumbledore?" Tonks asked. "Tell him you were seeing me," Harry said firmly. "That will work," Arcturus agreed. "Say Potter told you to come alone or he wouldn't show," he instructed. The other two nodded and prepared to leave. "How will we contact you?" Sirius asked. "You won't," Arcturus commanded. "Unless it is an emergency, then you call for his elf Dobby, but only if it is urgent. Understood?" he asked. They nodded, Sirius a lot more reluctantly, but he did agree it was much easier this way, and they would less likely be found out. With that, they both took hold of Sirius's return portkey and left. Andromeda and Ted both bid their farewells and left, also leaving Harry and Arcturus alone with the goblin. "That went as well as can be expected," Arcturus said. "You handled yourself well, Potter. You should be proud of your performance," he praised the teen. Harry just looked at the man impassively before replying. "That wasn't a performance," he intoned sincerely, and with that he disappeared with a gentle pop. Arcturus looked at the goblin with raised eyebrows and got a shrug in return. "Young Potter is quite something, isn't he?" the goblin asked. "He is indeed," Arcturus replied, shaking his head and following Harry home, in the same fashion. Break. Sirius and Tonks arrived in the hallway at Grimmauld Place, and silently made their way to the kitchen. They walked in on what was clearly an unscheduled meeting of the Order, and the room fell silent at their entrance. "It's nice of you to join us." Dumbledore broke the silence, sounding amused with a twinkle in his eyes. Before Sirius or Tonks could reply, the shrill tone of Molly Weasley cut through the room. "Sirius Black," she screeched. "Where on earth have you been?" she asked, with her hands on her hips. Sirius felt immediately irritated by the overbearing woman and interrupted before she could begin her lecture. "Not that it is any of your concern, but I went to see my godson," he replied coldly. "You saw Harry?" Molly asked, forgetting the scolding she wanted to give the man. "Well, where is he?" she added, looking between the two new arrivals. "Clearly he's not here," Sirius responded, gesturing around the room. "Well, why didn't you bring him back?" she questioned angrily. "You should have made him come back with you. He's just a boy and he needs looking after," she finished in a scolding tone. "Yeah, right," Tonks added quietly. Before she could be questioned, Sirius intervened on her behalf. "Harry does not want to be here. He is safe," he said, attempting to placate the distraught woman. And believe me, we couldn't make him come back if we wanted to. He grumbled, shaking his head. What's that supposed to mean? Molly asked the duo, who shared a knowing look. It means that Potter would wipe the floor with any of us who tried, Tonks explained. Believe me, I know, she concluded, remembering her duel with the teen. Surely you're exaggerating, Bill Weasley interjected. I wish I was, Tonks mumbled in reply. I doubt even Moody would stand a chance, she added, indicating the Auror. Moody looked excited by the prospect of that kind of challenge. Hey, you think that? He growled. I know it, Tonks replied. He does things that I've never seen, and you can't hit him, she said, clearly frustrated. And his power is just something else. He's already had his maturity, she added to those, with confused looks. 11 days it lasted, she finished shaking her head. 11 days, Dumbledore mused thoughtfully. Mine was only 9 and didn't start until I was 17, he added, looking amused. All the occupants in the room looked surprised by the information and shocked by the addition of what Dumbledore had said. He's really that powerful, Kingsley Shacklebolt asked in awe, and faster than a hiccup. Sirius added seriously. How is he? Dumbledore asked sincerely. What has he been doing? Training, obviously. Sirius began. He's bigger than me, and he's not a boy anymore, Sirius said sadly. Whatever happened to him in that graveyard turned him into a man, and a hell of a man at that, he added. But he is okay. He has never looked better and healthier, he finished, addressing Dumbledore. Dumbledore was relieved to say the least. It was not often he allowed himself to form a close attachment with a student, but Harry was different and had proven it time and time again. Dumbledore truly cared for the boy and wanted nothing more than for Harry to find some happiness in life. Happiness he had always been denied. I'm pleased, he said simply. You're not going to try and bring him back? Molly asked incredulously. You heard yourself that it wouldn't be possible, Dumbledore replied. And I wouldn't force him if I could, he said sternly. All we can do is support him when he needs it, and he will need it, he added confidently. The outcome of this war hinges on Harry, and it is up to him to end it, he concluded. You can't be serious, Albus. Molly interjected. I thought you were joking before, but you really mean it, don't you? You mean for Harry to kill him? She asked disbelievingly. I do, the older man replied firmly. It is the only way, he added sadly. Really, Headmaster, Snape cut in. You still think that Potter will win this war? He asked in frustration. Before Dumbledore could answer, Sirius interrupted his childhood nemesis. Not only has Harry vowed to kill that bastard, Snivellus, he has his sights set on anyone who has the mark, he said with no small amount of glee in his voice. He says he wants revenge for what has been done to his family and himself. He finished, putting emphasis on the word family. Well, I don't believe a word of it, Snape spat. He's just an arrogant and insolent whelp, just like his father, he concluded. He's nothing like James, Sirius said a little sadly. He's nothing like Lily, for that matter, he added. He is much more like Charles, he said, frowning. Then God help anyone who stands in front of him, Minerva whispered with a shudder. Those who were not aware of the older Potter's reputation just shrugged, and those who were felt a little easier knowing Harry was fighting the good fight. Moody and Dumbledore shared a knowing nod. Let's hope you don't run into him on one of your raids. Snape. Moody growled in amusement. If he is anything like his grandfather, then he will not hesitate to kill you, and believe me, it won't be pleasant, he advised, smirking. What was so great about Harry's grandfather? Bill Weasley asked. Charles Potter was probably the toughest bastard in centuries to be born to the wizarding world. Moody explained. He fought against Grindelwald personally, and had a reputation of taking no prisoners. He came and taught us for a while when I was a cadet, he mused. He shook his head at the painful memories of the training. Even Albus himself wouldn't want to fight him, isn't that right? He asked the older man in amusement. Dumbledore just shook his head. I had very little to do with Charles, but no, I would not have wanted to cross wands with him, he admitted. Would have been a hell of a fight, Moody said, sounding disappointed. Harry has a new wand then, Dumbledore stated to Sirius and Tonks, changing the subject. He does, Sirius replied. It is very unique, but I won't discuss it without his permission, he said firmly. Of course, Dumbledore agreed, inclining his head. Before we wrap up, is there any other business? He asked. Yes, Sirius sighed in a subdued manner. Hagrid and Maximu's mission was a failure. Harry came across the giants here, and they had killed them both. Albus, he finished somberly. Very well, Dumbledore said, swallowing sadly, his eyes immediately shining with tears at the loss of his friend. Meeting adjourned, he added, leaving instantly. Shouldn't we go after him? Molly asked worriedly. No, lass, Moody said, shaking his head. He will want to be alone a while, he added, patting the woman on the shoulder. With that, the meeting broke up, and only the Weasleys remained. What is Harry up to? Molly asked gently, not wanting to annoy Sirius. Well, as of now, he is hunting for a rat. Sirius answered happily. A rat? Molly asked. All will become clear soon enough, Molly. Sirius replied. Good night, he added to the confused trio, and he left the kitchen to head to his room for a much-needed good night's sleep.